My son said, I don't want your last name anymore. Mom's new husband says you're a loser, and I should take a real man's name. My ex-wife beamed. I said nothing. I calmly took out a pen and said, fine. Sign here. A week later, our family's estate lawyer called her, his voice shaking. Ma'am, do you realize what you just let him sign away? Look, I've seen betrayal play out in 1,000 different ways throughout my 53 years on this planet. And let me tell you something. Hollywood got it all wrong. There's no dramatic orchestral swell, no slow-motion moment where the knife slides between your ribs while rain pours cinematically down some grimy window. Nope. Real betrayal? It shows up on a gorgeous Sunday morning in May, wearing a pastel sundress and serving you Belgian waffles with a side of absolute devastation. Mine arrived with fresh-baked croissants that were still warm from whatever overpriced bakery Clara had discovered that week, and a carefully curated jazz playlist that probably cost someone 3 hours to put together on Spotify. Because God forbid we have brunch without the proper ambience, right? It was supposed to be peaceful. That's what Clara had promised when she texted me Tuesday evening with that irritating string of emojis she thinks makes her seem youthful. Just a casual family brunch. Croissant, hot beverage, 2 hearts, nothing formal. Miles really wants to see you. Yeah, Miles really wanted to see me the same way a defendant really wants to see the judge before sentencing. I should have known something was brewing when she insisted on that specific restaurant, Maison Lavande, the kind of place where they charge you $18 for eggs and act like they're doing you a favor. The tables were covered in white linen that probably cost more than my first car, and there was this aggressive amount of natural light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, like the universe wanted front-row seats to my humiliation. Clara was there, of course, looking like she'd just stepped out of a Pilates commercial, all glowing skin and strategic highlights. Next to her sat Trevor. Oh, Trevor, with his salmon-colored polo shirt and that smile that could probably be seen from the International Space Station. I swear to God, this man's teeth were so aggressively white they could have doubled as emergency flares if our plane went down. He's what happens when a motivational poster becomes sentient and gets a gym membership. My 17-year-old son Miles was wedged between them, looking uncomfortable in a button-down shirt that Clara had obviously picked out, because left to his own devices, that kid would show up everywhere in hoodies with mysterious stains. Then there were the extras, Clara's influencer cousins, Madison and Brittany, who I'm pretty sure share one brain cell that they pass back and forth depending on who's posting to Instagram that day. These women smile like they're being paid per tooth shown, documenting everything like their 73 followers are breathlessly awaiting updates on their avocado toast consumption. Madison kept angling her phone for better lighting, while Brittany did that thing where she pretends not to be posing, but is absolutely, definitely posing. The whole scene felt like I'd walked onto the set of a reality show I never auditioned for. We were about 20 minutes into this charade, me sawing through some overpriced Eggs Benedict while Trevor explained his investment philosophy. Translation. He watched 3 YouTube videos about cryptocurrency when Miles suddenly stood up, just pushed his chair back mid-bite, his mouth still half full of croissant, and the entire table went quiet in that way that makes your stomach drop. You know that feeling, right? When the air changes and you can tell something monumentally stupid is about to happen, but you're powerless to stop it. That's where I was. Frozen. Watching my son swallow hard, glance at Trevor for what I can only describe as approval, and then drop the bomb that would crater our relationship for the foreseeable future. I don't want your last name anymore, Dad. His voice cracked slightly on the word dad, which would have been touching if the words themselves weren't so completely insane. Trevor says real men make their own name, and I've been thinking, I want to take his surname instead. I want to be Miles Hartwell, not Miles Caldwell. You could have heard a pin drop in that restaurant. Hell, you could have heard a dust particle land on the tablecloth. Every fork within a 10-foot radius just stopped, suspended in midair like we'd all collectively entered some kind of temporal freeze. Even our waiter, Antoine or Jean-Paul, or whatever fake French name he was using, stopped his aggressive mimosery-filling routine and just stood there, pitcher raised, eyes wide. The jazz music suddenly felt really, really loud. Clara, to her credit, executed her part perfectly. Her face did this practiced expression of supportive mom meets spiritual guide, like she'd been rehearsing in the mirror all week. He's just expressing himself, Harold. Not honey, not sweetheart, not even the father of our child. Just Harold. Flat. Dismissive. Like I was her accountant or her podiatrist. Let him be. This is his journey, and we need to respect his truth. His truth. His journey. I swear, Clara collected therapy buzzwords like some people collect stamps. Every sentence out of her mouth sounded like she'd swallowed a self-help book and was now regurgitating it in real time. Trevor, meanwhile, was nodding along with this insufferable expression of wisdom, like he was Yoda and had just imparted some profound life lesson instead of convincing a teenager to legally disown his own father over brunch. I didn't yell. Here's the thing about me that drives Clara absolutely insane. I don't explode. I don't throw things or make scenes or give people the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. Instead, I reached down very calmly to the leather messenger bag I'd brought with me. Clara thought it had Miles's birthday present in it, which, technically, it did, just not the kind she was expecting. Pulled out a manila folder and extracted a single sheet of paper. The document looked official because it was official. I'd had my attorney draw it up years ago, right after Clara's spiritual awakening retreat turned into a 6-month affair with her yoga instructor. I slid the paper across the table toward Miles, uncapped my fountain pen, the Mont Blanc his grandfather had given me when I made partner, and said with perfect calm, "Perfect timing, champ. Sign here." Trevor's grin widened, because idiot's gonna idiot. "What's this, a permission slip?" He actually chuckled, looking around the table for validation. Madison giggled on cue. "Something like that," I replied, keeping my voice level and pleasant. "It gives him exactly what he wants. Complete separation from the Caldwell name and everything associated with it." Miles barely glanced at it. That's the thing about teenagers. They're so convinced of their own immortality and rightness that they don't read the fine print. They don't consider consequences. They just see an opportunity to look cool in front of their stepdad and his perfect teeth, and they go for it. He grabbed my pen, the same pen that had signed million-dollar contracts and partnership agreements, and scrawled his signature across the bottom line like he was autographing a yearbook. Quick, confident, stupid. Clara started clapping first, slow and deliberate, like this was some kind of performance art. Then the cousins joined in, then Trevor with his big meaty hands making these thunderous sounds. The other diners were staring now, probably thinking we were celebrating a graduation or engagement. If only they knew they were witnessing a financial execution. I stood up slowly, raised my mimosa glass, $60 for bottom-shelf champagne and orange juice, but who's counting, and said clearly, "To new names and old mistakes. May you both live with the consequences of your choices." They laughed. All of them. Clara actually threw her head back like I'd delivered the punchline to the world's funniest joke. Trevor clinked his glass against Miles's. Madison was already typing something on her phone, probably live-tweeting this disaster. They thought I was being a good sport, playing along with their little family revolution, maybe even blessing this insane decision. Spoiler alert, I absolutely was not. I sat back down, finished my overpriced eggs, made pleasant small talk about Trevor's upcoming podcast launch, because of course he is a podcast, and even picked up the check like the gentleman my father raised me to be. Tipped Antoine 20%. Smiled from Madison's Instagram story. Hugged my son goodbye, feeling his shoulders stiffen slightly, because teenagers are allergic to parental affection in public. As I walked to my car, I pulled out my phone and sent a single text to my attorney, Marcus Petros. Execute Clause 17.4. Effective immediately. His response came 30 seconds later. "Are you absolutely certain?" I typed back. Never been more certain of anything in my life. Because here's what none of them knew. What Miles in his teenage wisdom and Clara in her influencer-addled brain and Trevor in his motivational speaker delusion couldn't possibly understand. That paper wasn't symbolic. That signature wasn't some empty gesture of teenage rebellion. That document was a legally binding contract that triggered the voluntary name severance clause I'd buried deep in the Caldwell family trust years ago, a clause that automatically revoked all inheritance rights, trust fund access, scholarship provisions, and estate considerations for any descendant who formally renounced the family name. Miles had just signed away approximately $47 million, give or take a few properties. And the beautiful part? It was all his idea. Let me tell you about Trevor Hartwell, the human embodiment of every LinkedIn motivational post that's ever made you want to throw your phone into traffic. This guy is what happens when confidence completely bypasses humility, does a U-turn around self-awareness, and crashes headfirst into a dental surgery office. I'm not exaggerating when I say his teeth were so aggressively, blindingly white that they could have guided ships through fog. I'm talking searchlight-level luminosity. If we ever had a power outage, we could have just asked Trevor to smile, and boom, instant emergency lighting. The man probably bleached them weekly, maybe daily, and I wouldn't be surprised if he had a special toothbrush blessed by some Instagram wellness guru who charges $300 for activated charcoal sessions. The teeth were just the beginning, though. Trevor had this whole aesthetic going on that screamed, "I watched too many TED Talks, and now I think I'm Steve Jobs." He wore these tight-fitting polo shirts in colors that don't exist in nature: salmon, mint, something he probably called dusty sage, always tucked into chinos that looked like they'd been ironed with a protractor for maximum crease precision. His watch cost more than my first car, but somehow looked cheaper, all flashy and oversized, like he needed everyone in a 50-foot radius to know he had money, or at least access to credit cards. His hair was styled with so much product that it could probably survive a Category 5 hurricane without moving a single strand. Everything about him was calculated, rehearsed, packaged for maximum impression. And the voice. Oh God, the voice. Trevor spoke like he was constantly recording a podcast episode, which made sense because he literally was always talking about his podcast. Every sentence had this performative quality, this weird cadence, like he expected applause breaks. "You see, Harold." And yes, he called me Harold, even though I'd corrected him twice at that godforsaken brunch. Success isn't about what you inherit, it's about what you build. He'd say stuff like that with a straight face, completely oblivious to the irony that he was living in a house that Clara got in the divorce settlement. A house that I paid for. But sure, Trevor, tell me more about building things from scratch while you're literally standing on my foundation. The worst part? He kept calling my son Buddy. Not Miles. Not his name. Just Buddy, with this patronizing familiarity that made my skin crawl. "Hey, Buddy, pass the salt." Good thinking, Buddy. That's what I'm talking about, Buddy. Meanwhile, he called me man, in that way that's supposed to sound casual and friendly, but actually translates to, "I don't respect you enough to use your actual name, but I'm going to pretend we're equals, man." Like, "I hear you, man. That's fair, man. No worries, man." Each man was a tiny paper cut to my dignity, and he knew it. Or maybe he didn't. Honestly, I couldn't tell if Trevor was malicious or just spectacularly dense. The jury was still out. Throughout that entire brunch, Clara couldn't stop singing Trevor's praises like he was the second coming of Warren Buffett. "Trevor's tech investments are really taking off," she'd announced to the table, loud enough for nearby diners to hear, because God forbid Clara do anything without an audience. I nearly choked on my coffee. Tech investments. This clown had bought Dogecoin in 2021, after the peak, mind you, and had been talking about it ever since, like he'd discovered electricity. He had a whole story about getting in early on crypto that he'd told me 3 times, and each time the details changed slightly. First it was Dogecoin, then it was several cryptocurrencies, then it became a diversified portfolio of blockchain assets. Translation: he threw $5,000 at Robinhood, watched it turn into $2,000, and now tells everyone he's a tech investor. But Clara ate it up. She sat there nodding enthusiastically, touching his arm at every opportunity, doing that thing where she'd look at me to make sure I was witnessing her happiness. "Trevor just has such a brilliant mind for these things," she said, and I swear I saw Trevor's chest puff up like a rooster. Meanwhile, I was sitting there eating the driest toast known to mankind. Seriously, this fancy restaurant couldn't butter bread properly? And mentally calculating exactly what Miles had just signed away. The Caldwell Trust wasn't just money sitting in some bank account. It was property in Manhattan, commercial real estate in Boston, a vacation home in the Hamptons, shares in 3 different companies, scholarship funds, voting rights on family business decisions, and a network of connections that had taken 4 generations to build. Miles had traded all of that for Trevor's approval. Trevor, who thought a podcast about mindset and manifestation was going to be his ticket to success. Trevor, who'd actually told me to my face, that old wealth is outdated and that the future belongs to disruptors. This coming from a guy whose biggest disruption was switching from almond milk to oat milk, and making it his entire personality for 3 months. He'd literally posted about it on LinkedIn with some caption about embracing change and optimizing nutrition. 70 people liked it. 70 people who apparently had nothing better to do than validate Trevor's dairy alternatives. I watched him across that table, jaw working on some overpriced frittata, gesticulating wildly while explaining his 5 pillars of personal growth to Madison and Brittany, who were nodding along like he was revealing the secrets of the universe. His hands moved constantly, pointing, chopping the air, making these weird frame gestures that I guess he thought made him look visionary. Every few minutes, he dropped some buzzword salad: synergy, disruption, vertical integration, growth mindset, leveraging assets. Half the time I don't think he even knew what the words meant. He just assembled them in different combinations and hoped they sounded impressive. The thing about legacy, Harold, there it was again, Harold instead of my correct name, is that it can be a cage, man. Miles needs room to grow, to find his authentic self, you know. He said this while checking his reflection in a spoon, actually checking himself out in silverware. I watched him do it. He tilted the spoon slightly, caught his reflection, made this tiny adjustment to his hair, then continued talking like nothing had happened. The audacity, the absolute shamelessness. Clara jumped in right on cue, like they'd rehearsed this intervention. Trevor's been such an amazing role model for Miles. He's teaching him about entrepreneurship, self-reliance, building something meaningful. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to stand up and announce to the entire restaurant that Trevor's business was a drop-shipping operation that sold resistance bands on Amazon, and he'd made approximately $800 in profit last quarter. But I didn't. I just sat there, nodding politely, playing the role of the understanding ex-husband while internally planning the most elegant revenge in the history of family law. Trevor kept going, because Trevor always kept going. The man had no off switch. I've been mentoring Miles on personal branding, you know? In today's economy, your name is your brand, and he needs a brand that represents who he is, not who his ancestors were. This profound wisdom delivered while he had a piece of spinach stuck between his stupid perfect teeth. Nobody told him. I certainly wasn't going to. Let him walk around with vegetation in his grill, spouting philosophy he'd probably stolen from a Gary Vaynerchuk video. Miles sat there absorbing all of this like gospel, looking at Trevor with this expression of absolute admiration that once upon a time he'd reserved for me. That hurt more than the name rejection, if I'm being honest. Watching my kid gaze at this spray-tan motivational speaker wannabe like he'd just solved world hunger. Trevor wasn't teaching Miles about success. He was teaching him that style beats substance, that confidence trumps competence, that you can fail upward as long as you smile wide enough and use enough buzzwords. But here's what Trevor didn't know, what his growth mindset couldn't possibly comprehend. I'd built the Caldwell Trust from absolute scratch. My grandfather started with a corner grocery store in Brooklyn. My father turned it into a regional chain, then diversified into real estate. I took it further: investments, partnerships, legacy planning. Every property, every clause, every generational safety net was carefully constructed and legally protected. The whole thing was tied to the surname, to the legacy, to the bloodline. It wasn't about ego. It was about ensuring that every Caldwell descendant had opportunities, had resources, had a foundation to build from. Drop the name, you drop the inheritance. Simple as that. Clause 17.4 wasn't some petty trap I'd set. It was a logical consequence, a protection against exactly this kind of stupidity. And Miles, in his teenage wisdom and Trevor-influenced delusion, had just activated it with a flourish, signing away his entire future because some dude with a podcast and a Tesla, at least Tesla, by the way, I checked, told him that real men make their own name. Well, congratulations, Miles. You made your own name. Now let's see what that name is worth when college application season rolls around and your trust fund reads exactly $0.00. Let's see how authentic you feel when your cousins are summering in the Hamptons and you're figuring out student loans. But sure, keep listening to Trevor. Trevor, who probably thinks a Roth IRA is a type of sandwich. Trevor, whose idea of financial planning is setting up a Patreon for his meditation videos. Trevor, the man with too many teeth and not enough sense, who just helped my son make the most expensive mistake of his young life. And I just sat there, smiling, eating my toast, letting them think they'd won. That document Miles signed with all the careful consideration of someone accepting cookies on a website? Yeah, that wasn't some symbolic gesture or empty threat designed to scare him straight. It was Clause 17.4 of the Caldwell Family Trust, officially titled Voluntary Name Severance and Consequent Disentitlement Provision. I know. It sounds like legal mumbo-jumbo, the kind of thing your eyes glaze over when you're flipping through contracts. That's exactly how I wanted it to sound. See, the thing about really effective traps is they don't look like traps. They look boring. They look like standard boilerplate language that nobody bothers to read because who has the time or energy to parse through dense legal terminology when you're busy being a rebellious teenager trying to impress your stepdad? I wrote that clause myself, or rather, I had my attorney Marcus Petros draft it to my exact specifications back in 2019, right after Clara's so-called spiritual yoga retreat in Sedona turned into a 6-month affair with an instructor named River. Yes, River. That was actually his legal name, apparently, because his parents were hippies who thought normal names were too conformist. The guy taught Vinyas flow and talked about opening your heart chakra while simultaneously opening my wife's legs, but I digress. The point is, I was going through the divorce, watching Clara transform from a reasonable human being into this pseudo-spiritual influencer obsessed with crystals and Mercury retrograde, and I realized I needed insurance. Protection. A failsafe against the inevitable moment when she'd poison my son against me. The clause itself was actually quite elegant in its simplicity, buried on page 47 of a 63-page trust document that most people would need prescription stimulants to get through. It stated, in carefully worded legalese that had been reviewed by 3 different attorneys, that any descendant bearing the Caldwell name who voluntarily and formally renounced said name in writing would thereby forfeit all entitlements, privileges, and benefits associated with the Caldwell Family Trust. This included, but was not limited to, trust fund distributions, property inheritance, scholarship allocations, voting rights in family estate decisions, access to the family legal team, beneficiary status on life insurance policies, and membership in the Caldwell Legacy Foundation. Now, you might be thinking, Harold, that seems a bit extreme. A little harsh, maybe. And you'd be right, if we were talking about normal circumstances. But here's what you need to understand about legacy wealth. It's not just money sitting in an account somewhere. It's a living, breathing ecosystem that requires maintenance, respect, and commitment. My grandfather didn't build that corner grocery store in 1947, so his great-grandchildren could casually discard the family name because some motivational speaker with financing issues told them to. My father didn't expand into real estate and investment portfolios so future generations could treat the Caldwell legacy like it was a Netflix subscription they could cancel whenever they felt like it. The trust was structured like a fortress, and I designed it that way deliberately. Multiple layers of protection, each one requiring specific criteria to access. Your name was your key. It was that simple. Caldwell wasn't just a surname. It was a brand, a guarantee, a door opener. It meant something in certain circles, carried weight in certain rooms, granted access that money alone couldn't buy. And Miles had just tossed it away like a receipt from CVS that he'd never need again. I never actually imagined my own kid would be the one to trigger Clause 17.4. When I had Marcus draft it, I was thinking about potential future scenarios. Maybe a grandchild I'd never meet, married to someone who convinced them to hyphenate or change names entirely, some distant relative I didn't have an emotional connection to. The clause was supposed to be a deterrent, a warning sign that said, think very carefully before you do something this monumentally stupid. It was never supposed to be used against Miles. But then again, I never imagined Miles would stand up at a public brunch and declare that he didn't want my name anymore. So I guess we were both full of surprises. When Miles scrawled his signature across that document, and I mean scrawled, the kid's handwriting looks like a drunk spider fell into an inkwell and stumbled across the page. Something very specific happened in the digital infrastructure of the Caldwell Trust. See, I'd had the whole thing automated years ago, because I believe in efficiency and also because I don't trust human emotion to properly enforce consequences. The signed waiver was photographed by my phone, under the guise of me documenting this special moment for Miles, because I'm not a complete monster and didn't want to seem suspicious. Uploaded to a secure server, processed through OCR software, verified by facial recognition to confirm it was actually Miles signing, and then triggered an automated alert to Marcus Petros's encrypted phone. That night, around 11:30, I was sitting in my study with a glass of Macallan 18. The good stuff. Because if you're going to burn your relationship with your only child, you might as well have quality scotch while you do it, when my phone buzzed. Marcus, just 2 words. Are you serious? I replied, deadly. The phone rang immediately. Marcus doesn't text when he's concerned. He calls, because he's old school like that. I answered on the second ring. Harold, he said, and I could hear him pacing in his office because Marcus paces when he's agitated. Are you actually triggering 17.4? Like, for real triggering it, not just threatening it. Effective immediately. I confirmed, swirling my scotch and watching the amber liquid catch the lamplight. Consider this a teachable moment. There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing, probably pinching the bridge of his nose the way he does when clients make decisions he considers questionable. Harold, you understand what this means, right? This isn't reversible without unanimous family council approval. I wrote the damn thing, Marcus. I'm aware of the terms. Another pause. He's 17. He's old enough to sign legal documents, apparently. Old enough to publicly disown his father and heritage. Old enough to make choices. He's old enough to live with consequences. Jesus Christ, Marcus muttered. You're savage. I took a sip of scotch, let it burn pleasantly down my throat. Not savage, just educated. There's a difference. Savage implies emotion, impulse, lack of control. This is the opposite. This is the most controlled, calculated, and frankly justified response to disrespect I've ever implemented. Marcus sighed heavily. He'd been my attorney for 23 years, seen me through the divorce, multiple business acquisitions, and one particularly nasty lawsuit involving a commercial property in Boston. He knew how I operated. You're going to burn this bridge to absolute ash, you know that? Marcus, my son stood up in a public restaurant and announced to everyone present, including Clara's Instagram-obsessed relatives who I guarantee live-streamed the whole thing, that he doesn't want to be associated with me or my name. The bridge was already burning. I'm just making sure it burns completely so nobody wastes time trying to rebuild it. What about college? Marcus asked. His trust fund was supposed to cover. Not my problem anymore, I interrupted. He wanted independence from the Caldwell name. He's got it. Congratulations to him. He's independent. He can apply for student loans like everyone else. Or maybe Trevor can pay for it with his Dogecoin dividends. I could hear Marcus typing, probably pulling up the trust documents on his computer. You want me to execute the full severance protocol? All of it. Everything. Funds frozen, scholarships revoked, college trust inaccessible, voting rights terminated, beneficiary status removed. I want every single privilege associated with being a Caldwell stripped from his accounts by tomorrow morning. More typing. This is going to create a massive family situation. You understand that? Your father is going to call me. Your sister is going to call me. Hell, your nephew Ben is probably going to call me, and I don't even represent him. Then bill them for your time, I said. I'm paying you enough to handle family drama. That's part of the service, isn't it? Marcus laughed despite himself. You're the most cold-blooded client I've ever had, and I've represented hedge fund managers. I prefer consistent, I corrected. I told Miles 1,000 times that names matter, that legacy matters, that there are consequences for disrespecting family heritage. He didn't believe me. Now he gets to learn the hard way. It's called parenting, Marcus. Old-fashioned concept, I know. It's called nuclear warfare, Marcus countered. But fine. It's your trust, your money, your son. I'll execute the protocol. But Harold, for what it's worth, I think you should sleep on this. Give it a week. Make sure this is really what you want. It's what he wanted, I said quietly. I'm just giving him exactly what he asked for. He wanted separation from the Caldwell name. Done. He wanted to be his own man, make his own way, build his own legacy with Trevor as his guide. Perfect. He's free. Completely, totally, financially free. After I hung up with Marcus, I sat there for a long time, just staring at the family portrait hanging above my fireplace. It was from 2014, before the divorce, before Clara found her chakras, before Trevor and his teeth entered our lives. Miles was 12 in that photo, gap-toothed and grinning, wearing a suit that was slightly too big because he'd insisted on dressing like me. He'd wanted to be just like Dad back then. Wanted to learn about the business, asked questions about Grandpa's grocery store, drew pictures of himself with Caldwell and Son written across the top. That kid was gone now, replaced by someone who thought surnames were negotiable and legacy was optional. And you know what? That was fine. He'd made his choice. I'd made mine. If Karma ever needed an assistant, she could have taken lessons from the Caldwell Family Trust automation system, because that thing didn't care about feelings or second chances. It just cared about rules, and Miles had broken the most important one. The next morning, I woke up at 6:30 like I always do, because discipline doesn't take vacations even when you're about to financially obliterate your only child. I made my espresso, double shot, no sugar, because I'm not a barbarian. Ate some Greek yogurt with granola that probably cost more per ounce than gold, and then sat down at my home office desk to do what needed to be done. No hesitation, no second guessing, no dramatic internal monologue about whether I was doing the right thing. I'd spent all night not losing sleep over this decision, which told me everything I needed to know about how I felt. When you're at peace with nuclear options, you're probably making the right call. My home office is basically a shrine to organized wealth management. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with legal texts, financial reports, and first editions of books about dynasty building that I'll probably never read, but look impressive during Zoom calls. There's a standing desk made from reclaimed wood that cost $8,000 because apparently regular wood isn't good enough anymore. 3 monitors arranged in a gentle curve, each one displaying different aspects of the family empire, stocks, properties, trust accounts. It's the kind of setup that screams, I have my life together and also probably too much money, which, fair assessment. I rolled my chair up to the center monitor and opened the Caldwell Legacy system, which sounds way more dramatic than it actually is. It's basically a custom-built digital fortress designed by a cybersecurity firm that normally works with defense contractors. My father had it created back in 2008, when he realized that managing generational wealth through paper files and phone calls was insane. The system tracks everything, every asset, every beneficiary, every clause activation, every trust distribution. It's like having a really judgmental accountant who never sleeps and never forgets anything you've ever done. Accessing the system requires more security than launching nuclear missiles, which is appropriate given what I was about to do. First step, fingerprint scanner. I pressed my right index finger against the reader built into my keyboard and waited for the little green light. Approved. Step 2, retina scan. I leaned forward toward the webcam, which had been modified with some kind of fancy infrared technology that probably cost more than a decent used car, and stared into the lens while it analyzed my eyeball. A few seconds of uncomfortable scanning, then another green light. Approved. Step 3, and this is where it gets properly paranoid, the passphrase. Not a password, a passphrase. 16 words that have to be spoken aloud in the correct order with the correct emphasis and cadence, because apparently typing wasn't secure enough. The system uses voice recognition software that can detect if you're under duress based on vocal stress patterns. If I sounded scared or coerced, it would lock down immediately and alert Marcus. But I wasn't scared. I was calm, focused, maybe even a little excited, if I'm being honest. I leaned toward the microphone and spoke clearly. The name endures through generations of careful stewardship and unwavering commitment to family legacy regardless of contemporary challenges. Yes, that's actually the passphrase. My father wrote it. Very on-brand for him. The system processed my voice, compared it to baseline recordings, analyzed the stress patterns, and then displayed the most beautiful words in the English language. Access granted. Welcome, Harold Caldwell. The main dashboard loaded, and I'll admit, there's something deeply satisfying about seeing your entire family's wealth laid out in clean, organized data visualization. Assets totaling just north of $470 million, spread across real estate, investments, trusts, and business holdings. Not bad for a family that started with a corner grocery store in Brooklyn 78 years ago. Each family member had their own profile card with their photo, current status, and entitlements. There was my father, status, active patriarch. My sister Rebecca, status, active beneficiary. Her kids, my nephew Ben and niece Sarah, both active beneficiaries. And then there was Miles, still showing that awkward school photo from sophomore year where his hair was doing something truly unfortunate. Miles Caldwell, status, active beneficiary, Trust value, $47,382,000. I clicked on his profile card and watched as a side panel expanded with all his details. College fund, $2.3 million. Property allocations, 3. Scholarship provisions. Active for any accredited university. Voting rights, 1 share on family council decisions. Life insurance beneficiary status, confirmed. It was all there, everything he'd just signed away without reading a single word of that document. There's a search function in the system because when you're managing this much complexity, you need to be able to find things quickly. I typed clause 17.4 into the search bar and hit enter. The system immediately pulled up the full legal text, along with the activation protocol. At the bottom of the screen, there was a button, just one button, red and ominous, labeled Execute Voluntary Severance Protocol. I stared at that button for maybe 10 seconds, not because I was reconsidering, but because I was savoring the moment. This was it. This was the point of no return. Once I clicked that button, an automated sequence would trigger that would systematically strip Miles of every single privilege associated with being a Caldwell. Bank accounts would freeze. Trust fund access would terminate. Property allocations would revert to the general family pool. Scholarship provisions would cancel. His name would remain in the system, but his status would change from active beneficiary to something much less pleasant. I clicked the button. The system didn't ask, "Are you sure?" like some amateur software. It knew that if you'd made it this far through the security protocols, you were sure. Instead, it immediately opened an execution window with a progress bar and a detailed log of every action being performed. I watched, sipping my espresso, as the system worked through its checklist with ruthless efficiency. Verifying signed waiver document. Verified. Confirming signatory identity via facial recognition. Confirmed, Miles Henry Caldwell. Checking for coercion indicators. None detected. Validating legal enforceability. Valid. Beginning asset severance protocol. And then it just started listing everything it was doing, line by line, like the world's most brutal to-do list. Freezing trust fund account TF, 2007, MC. Complete. Revoking scholarship provision SP, EDU, 2024. Complete. Canceling property allocation PA, HAMP, 07. Complete. Terminating voting rights VR, FC, 001. Complete. Removing beneficiary status from life insurance policy LI, 2007-447. Complete. It took maybe 90 seconds for the entire process to complete. 90 seconds to undo 17 years of financial planning and generational wealth transfer. The progress bar filled completely, turned green, and then the system displayed a confirmation message that was almost cheerful in its finality. Severance protocol complete. Status update. Miles Henry Caldwell. Void due to voluntary name severance per clause 17.4. All entitlements revoked. Archive status. Severed descendant. The system even made a little ping sound, like, "Congratulations, you've successfully disinherited your child." It was the same cheerful notification sound that plays when you complete literally any task in the system, transferring funds, updating beneficiaries, whatever. Super casual. Just another Tuesday morning in wealth management. I refreshed Miles's profile card and watched as the numbers updated in real time. Trust value, $47,382,000 became trust value, $0. Active beneficiary became severed descendant. His profile picture turned grayscale, which felt a bit dramatic even for this system, but I guess the developers wanted to make the status change visually obvious. There was now a red banner across the top of his profile that read, "Warning, entitlements void, clause 17.4 activated." All of it automated. All of it documented. No emotion, no human error, no opportunity for second-guessing or appeals to sentiment. Just pure, mathematical consequence. If karma ever needed to upgrade from the whole "what goes around comes around" spiritual vagueness to something more concrete and enforceable, she should have taken notes from the Caldwell legacy system. This thing didn't care about intention or feelings or teenage rebellion. It cared about rules, signatures, and legal clauses. I sat back in my chair and pulled up the automated notification log to see what messages the system had sent out. There were several. One to Marcus Petros, confirming execution and providing a full audit trail. One to the family accountant, updating tax projections and beneficiary distributions. One to the trust administrator at our family bank, informing them of the status change and account freezes. And one to my father, because the system was programmed to alert the patriarch of any major trust modifications. My phone buzzed approximately 30 seconds later. Dad. Of course. I let it go to voicemail. I'd deal with that conversation later, probably over whiskey, after he'd had time to review the documentation and realize I hadn't just done this on a whim. My father understood consequences better than anyone. He'd approve, eventually, even if he'd be disappointed it had come to this. I generated a full report of the severance action, 23 pages of legal documentation, account changes, and clause citations, and saved it to an encrypted folder labeled Miles, Severance 2025. Then I forwarded a copy to my personal attorney, my accountant, and my therapist, because yes, I have a therapist, and yes, she was going to have thoughts about this decision at our next session. The whole thing took less than 15 minutes from start to finish. 15 minutes to completely restructure my son's financial future. 15 minutes to enforce a consequence he didn't even know existed when he signed that waiver. Some people say revenge is a dish best served cold. I disagree. Revenge is a dish best served through properly structured legal instruments and automated enforcement protocols. I closed the Caldwell legacy system, finished my espresso, and opened my email to start my actual workday. There were contracts to review, calls to make, a meeting with a commercial real estate developer at 10. Life goes on, business continues, the world keeps turning. And somewhere out there, Miles was probably still asleep in his room at Clara's house, completely unaware that he'd just woken up $47 million poorer than he'd gone to bed. He wanted to make his own name? Great. He could start by making his own money. Welcome to independence, kid. Hope Trevor's podcast sponsorships come through. By evening, my son had become a minor celebrity in the absolute worst corners of the internet, which is saying something because the internet has a lot of truly terrible corners. I discovered this delightful development around 7 p.m. when I was making myself a bourbon on the rocks and contemplating whether to order sushi or Italian for dinner. The eternal struggle of the suddenly single man with disposable income and no one to cook for. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Rebecca. Have you seen Miles's Instagram? Please tell me you've seen it. Call me immediately. Now, I'm not on Instagram. I have an account that my assistant set up years ago because apparently not having social media makes you look like either a technophobe or a serial killer, but I've posted exactly 3 times, all pictures of historical buildings, because that seemed safe and boring enough to avoid controversy. I don't scroll, don't like, don't comment, and definitely don't keep up with what my teenage son posts online, because that felt like a level of surveillance that even I wasn't comfortable with. But Rebecca's text had that particular energy of, you need to witness this disaster immediately. So I opened the app and typed Miles's username into the search bar. His profile loaded, and there it was, posted approximately 6 hours ago. A photo of him standing in front of Clara's house, my former house. Let's be clear about ownership history here, with this absolutely insufferable expression of triumph on his face. Arms crossed, chin up, wearing a tank top that said self-made in distressed letters, which was hilariously ironic given that he'd literally never paid for anything in his entire life. The caption made me want to throw my phone into the nearest body of water. Finally dropped that loser's name. Taking Trevor's surname now. Feels good flexed biceps fire crown. Time to build MY legacy, not ride on someone else's. Hashtag new beginnings, hashtag self-made, hashtag real man, hashtag breaking chains, hashtag authentic life, hashtag no regrets. I had to read it 3 times because my brain refused to process that my son had actually posted this. Called me a loser. Publicly. To his 2,847 followers, which was somehow even more depressing than the content itself. The kid couldn't even be a successful influencer while insulting me. But the internet, oh the internet, did what it does best. It rewarded absolute stupidity with validation. The post had 1,243 likes. 1,243 people had seen my son announce his intention to legally disown his father and thought, yes, this deserves my approval. The comments section was a cesspool of support that made me lose faith in humanity's future. That's growth, King. Crown, wrote someone named at Motivation Bro with a profile picture that was just a picture of a lion. You're living your truth. So proud of you. Sparkles from an account called at Spiritual Warrior 23. Old generation doesn't understand. Keep grinding. 100 points from at Hustle Harder, whose bio said he was a crypto investor and life coach, which translated to unemployed guy who bought Bitcoin once. There were hundreds of these. Just an endless scroll of strangers validating my son's decision to torpedo his entire financial future based on nothing but the caption and his smug face. Nobody asked why. Nobody questioned whether maybe there was more to the story. Nobody suggested that perhaps publicly calling your father a loser might be a decision worth reconsidering. Nope. Just pure, unfiltered support for teenage rebellion dressed up as personal growth. And then I saw it. Clara had commented. Not just commented, but been one of the first responders, which meant she'd probably been waiting for him to post this. Maybe even helped him write the caption. 3 red heart emojis. That's it. That was her contribution to our son publicly disrespecting me. Red heart, red heart, red heart. No words, no context, just hearts. The digital equivalent of applause. I screenshotted that immediately because you better believe that was going into my evidence of parental alienation folder that my attorney had recommended I maintain. Exhibit A. Mother encourages public disrespect of father. But wait, it got better. I clicked over to Trevor's profile, at Trev Hartwell, because apparently Trevor was too many letters for his personal brand, and found that he'd reposted Miles's announcement to his own feed. Reposted it. With commentary. So proud to welcome this young man into the Hartwell family. Leadership isn't about what you inherit, it's about what you build. Excited to mentor Miles on his journey to authentic manhood. Flexed biceps, folded hands, hashtag family first, hashtag real leadership, hashtag mentorship matters. Trevor had posted this to LinkedIn. Actually posted it to LinkedIn, the professional networking site where people are supposed to share job updates and industry insights, not document their role in convincing someone else's kid to change their surname. And people were engaging with it. 47 likes, 12 comments, all from people with titles like entrepreneur, business development consultant, and CEO of companies I'd never heard of and probably didn't exist. This is what mentorship looks like, wrote a guy whose profile said he was a thought leader in the disruptive space. I didn't even know what that meant, but I hated it. I took screenshots of everything. Every post, every comment, every share. I created a new folder on my computer labeled Digital Evidence, Miles Severance 2025, and saved it all. The timestamps, the captions, the engagement metrics, everything. My attorney Marcus had taught me years ago during the divorce that social media posts are admissible evidence in court, and while I wasn't planning on taking this to court, the trust documents handled everything legally. I believed in documentation. You never know when you might need proof that your ex-wife and her tooth-bleached husband encouraged your son to publicly humiliate you. I went back to Miles's post and scrolled through more comments, morbidly fascinated by the sheer volume of support from complete strangers. Your dad sounds toxic anyway, triangular flag, wrote someone who literally knew nothing about me except what my son had written in a caption. Blood doesn't make family. 100 points from an account that posted exclusively about anime and energy drinks. Real men make their own path. Oncoming fist from someone whose profile described them as a digital nomad and passive income specialist, which I was pretty sure meant unemployed and living with parents. What struck me most wasn't the comments themselves. Internet strangers say stupid things. That's just how the internet works. But that Miles was engaging with them. He was replying, thanking people for their support, liking comments that call me toxic, building this narrative in real time where he was the brave protagonist breaking free from his oppressive father, and Trevor was the enlightened mentor guiding him toward authentic manhood. It was performance art, except the performance had real consequences that Miles couldn't possibly understand yet. Someone had even commented, "Did your dad try to stop you?" What did he say? And Miles, my brilliant son, had replied, "He actually helped me do it, LOL. Gave me the papers and everything. Didn't think I'd actually sign them, but I did, face with tears of joy, 100 points." I screenshot that immediately. Exhibit B, voluntary acknowledgement of informed consent. The kid had just publicly confirmed that I hadn't coerced him, hadn't forced him, had actually provided him with documentation that he willingly signed. Any future argument about not understanding what he was signing? Dead on arrival. He'd told the internet he knew exactly what he was doing and did it anyway. The post had been shared to Twitter, TikTok, and apparently some Reddit forum about toxic parenting, where complete strangers were dissecting my relationship with my son based on nothing but his Instagram caption. I found a whole thread where people were psychoanalyzing me, diagnosing me with narcissistic personality disorder, and recommending books about recovering from parental abuse. One person wrote a detailed comment about how controlling parents use inheritance as leverage and how brave Miles was for choosing authenticity over money. If only they knew that Miles hadn't chosen anything over money. He just didn't know he was choosing poverty until it was too late. I wanted to comment, God, I wanted to create a fake account and just write, fun fact, the loser dad built a $47 million trust fund that you just signed away, but sure, enjoy your new name and your student loans. But I didn't. That would be petty, and more importantly, it would be premature. Let him have his moment. Let him enjoy his internet validation and his 1,200 likes and his comments from strangers who would forget his name by tomorrow. Let Trevor bask in his LinkedIn engagement from fellow entrepreneurs who were all probably equally broke. Because here's the thing about internet fame. It's fast and meaningless and disappears the moment something shinier comes along. But legal documents? Those last forever. Trust clauses? Those are permanent. Financial consequences? Those don't care how many followers you have or how many fire emojis people leave on your posts. I finished my bourbon, ordered the sushi, spicy tuna roll, salmon sashimi, and that fancy toro that costs too much but tastes incredible, and settled in to watch my son's social media triumph. He was trending in his own little corner of the internet, getting attention and validation, and probably feeling like he'd made the best decision of his life. Trevor was being celebrated as a mentor and father figure. Clara was being praised for supporting her son's journey. And me? I was being called toxic, controlling, a bad father, a loser. Random people who knew nothing about me or my family were writing essays about what a terrible person I must be. It was almost impressive how confidently they constructed entire narratives from a single Instagram caption. But I wasn't worried. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even particularly bothered. Because in approximately 2 to 6 weeks, depending on how long it took Miles to actually check his bank accounts or try to access his college fund, reality was going to hit him like a freight train made of consequences. And when it did, all those supportive comments from internet strangers weren't going to pay his tuition. All those fire emojis weren't going to fund his lifestyle. All that validation wasn't going to replace the $47 million he'd just signed away for absolutely nothing except Trevor's approval. I raised my glass to my phone screen, to Miles's smug face in that ridiculous self-made tank top. To new beginnings, kid. Hope your likes keep you warm at night when you're filling out FAFSA forms. The internet had made him a hero. The Caldwell legacy system had made him broke. I knew which one mattered more. A week later, I was sitting in my favorite leather chair, the one that cost more than some people's cars but cradles you like a supportive parent, unlike actual parents who sometimes fail spectacularly, sipping a glass of Macallan 18 and reading a fascinating book about Byzantine architecture. It was peaceful. Quiet. The kind of evening that makes you grateful for divorce and empty houses and the absence of teenagers who think they know everything. My phone was on silent because I'd learned years ago that nothing good comes from being constantly available, but it kept lighting up on the side table like a distress beacon. I ignored it the first 3 times. By the 4th, I glanced over and saw Marcus Petros's name flashing across the screen with that particular persistence that meant either someone had died or something equally dramatic had occurred. Marcus didn't call after 8 p.m. unless it was serious. The man had boundaries, respected work-life balance, and generally operated like a reasonable human being. So when he called at 8:47 on a Tuesday night, I knew something had happened. I marked my page, because I'm civilized and don't dog-ear books, especially first editions, and answered. Marcus, let me guess. Clara finally read the clause. There was this long exhale on the other end, the kind that sounds like someone has been holding their breath for approximately 6 hours and just remembered that oxygen exists. Harold, he said, and his voice had that quality of someone who'd been dealing with hysterical phone calls and now needed a drink. I just got off a call with Clara. She's hysterical. I smiled into my scotch glass. So she finally consulted an attorney. What tipped her off? Did Miles try to access his trust fund? Apply for that Princeton scholarship? Try to vote on family council business? All of the above, apparently, Marcus said, and I could hear him moving around, probably pacing in his home office the way he does when cases get complicated. She called me screaming, and I mean screaming, Harold, about how you've stolen Miles's inheritance. Used the word theft approximately 47 times. Threatened to sue. Threatened to call the police. Threatened to contact every news outlet in the tri-state area. Then she cried. Then she threatened again. It was a whole performance. And you explained to her that you can't steal something that was voluntarily relinquished through signed legal documentation? I asked, swirling my drink and genuinely enjoying this conversation more than I'd enjoyed anything in weeks. I explained, Marcus confirmed, in great detail, using small words, that her son signed a legally binding waiver that explicitly triggered Clause 17.4 of the Caldwell Family Trust, thereby forfeiting all entitlements, and that this was entirely voluntary, witnessed, and documented. I sent her copies of the signed waiver, the trust documentation, and the severance protocol execution report. All 600 pages of it. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud, which was probably cruel, but the image of Clara trying to read 600 pages of legal documentation was too perfect. How'd she take that? She called me a heartless bastard and hung up, Marcus said, but I could hear the smile in his voice. Then she called back 10 minutes later, much calmer, and asked if there was a reversal process. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment when Clara, who'd spent the last 3 years telling everyone who'd listened that I was controlling and manipulative, realized that her beloved Trevor had led their son directly into a legal bear trap. And you told her? I told her the truth, Marcus said. That according to the trust documents, reversal of a Clause 17.4 severance requires unanimous approval from the family council, which consists of you, your father, your sister Rebecca, and nephew Ben. All 4 members must vote yes for reinstatement. I took a long sip of scotch, savoring both the burn and the satisfaction. So basically never. Marcus laughed properly now, that lawyer laugh that sounds expensive. Exactly. She asked what the chances were of getting unanimous approval, and I told her that based on my professional assessment, she had a better chance of winning the lottery, getting struck by lightning, and being abducted by aliens on the same day. You didn't actually say that. I absolutely said that. She'd been screaming at me for 40 minutes. Harold. I was done being diplomatic. He paused, and I heard ice clinking in a glass. He was drinking too. Good. She tried a different approach then. Got all sweet and reasonable. Said that Miles was just a confused teenager. That Trevor had manipulated him. That he didn't understand what he was signing. Except he literally posted on Instagram that he knew exactly what he was signing and did it anyway, I pointed out. I have screenshots. Time-stamped, archived, saved in multiple locations including cloud storage and a physical hard drive in my safe. I mentioned that, Marcus said. Sent her the screenshots. That's when she started crying again. Real tears this time, I think. Said you were destroying your son's life over a moment of teenage rebellion. I set down my glass, suddenly less amused. I'm not destroying anything, Marcus. I'm enforcing consequences that were clearly outlined in legal documents that have existed for 6 years. Miles made a choice. A public, documented, celebrated choice. He wanted independence from the Caldwell name. He got it. He wanted to be his own man. Perfect. He can be his own man with his own money, which he'll have to earn himself now. I know that. You know that. Even Clara knows that, deep down, though she'll never admit it. Marcus sighed. She asked me to talk to you. To convince you to reconsider. And you said, I said that I'm your attorney, not your therapist or your priest, and that legal matters are separate from family reconciliation. I also reminded her that I couldn't discuss without your permission with her, which you definitely haven't given me. Correct, I confirmed. What else did she say? She wanted to know what it would take. Like, specifically, what would you need to see or hear to even consider bringing this to the family council for a vote? Marcus paused. I told her I honestly didn't know, because you and I haven't discussed it. Have we? We hadn't. Because I hadn't thought that far ahead, or maybe because I deliberately avoided thinking about it. What do you think, counselor? Hypothetically speaking, if your client, who is definitely not vindictive, just consistent, wanted to establish criteria for potential reinstatement, what would be reasonable? Marcus was quiet for a moment, and I could hear him thinking, probably pulling up the trust documents on his computer. Hypothetically? I'd say you'd want evidence of genuine understanding and remorse. Not just, I'm sorry I got caught, but actual comprehension of what was lost and why it mattered. You'd want time. Can't reverse something this significant after a week. You'd want changed behavior, maybe a demonstrated commitment to family values and legacy. And honestly, Harold, you'd probably want Trevor out of the picture because as long as that guy is in Miles's ear, nothing's going to change. That's not really within my control, I pointed out. No, but you could make it a condition. Miles wants back in the trust? Fine. But he needs to demonstrate that he's making decisions independently, not just following whatever Trevor suggests. Marcus paused. You could also require public acknowledgement. He disowned you publicly, made you look like a villain to his 2,000 Instagram followers. Fair's fair. I considered this, rolling the crystal glass between my palms. You think I'm being cruel. I think you're being exactly who you've always been. Someone who values legacy, respect, and consequences. Is it harsh? Yeah. Is it legal? Absolutely. Is it effective? We'll find out. Marcus took a drink. Clara also asked how Miles is supposed to pay for college now. Student loans exist. Scholarships exist. Work-study programs exist. Part-time jobs exist. Millions of Americans figure it out every year without trust funds. Miles is smart enough when he bothers to apply himself. He'll manage. That's essentially what I told her in more diplomatic terms. She didn't love that answer. I'm sure she didn't. I picked up my book, ready to return to Byzantine architecture and away from family drama. Anything else? She asked if you even still love him. Marcus said quietly. Your son. She asked if you still love him, or if this is just about punishing her through Miles. That hit differently than the rest of the conversation. I set the book back down. What did you say? I said that I'm not qualified to speak to your emotional state, but that from a legal perspective, the trust was structured to protect family legacy, and that enforcement of its clauses isn't personal, it's procedural. He paused. But between us, Harold, just you and me talking as friends, not attorney-client. What's the answer? Do you still love him? I stared at the family portrait on the wall, the one from 2014, where Miles was 12 and still thought I hung the moon. Of course I still love him, Marcus. He's my son. I'll always love him. But love doesn't mean protecting people from their own stupid decisions. Love sometimes means letting them fall so they learn to get back up. He made a choice. He celebrated that choice. He called me a loser on the internet for 1,200 people to see. And now he's learning that choices have consequences. That's very philosophical, Marcus observed. Also very expensive, from Miles's perspective. The most expensive lessons usually are. I finished my scotch. Is Clara going to keep calling you? Probably. I'm billing you for it, by the way. Hazard pay for dealing with your ex-wife's dramatics. Bill me double. You've earned it. I stood up, walked to the window overlooking the garden. Do me a favor, Marcus. Next time she calls, and she will call, tell her that if Miles wants to discuss reinstatement, he can contact me directly. Not through her, not through Trevor, not through lawyers. Him. Directly. Man to man, if he's such a real man now. You want him to call you? I want him to look me in the eye and explain why he deserves a second chance after publicly humiliating me and throwing away 4 generations of legacy on the advice of a motivational speaker with a podcast. I turned back to my chair. Think he'll do it? Marcus laughed. Not a chance. The kid's 17 and terrified of confrontation. He'll avoid you for months. Then I guess we have our answer about whether he's mature enough for reinstatement. I sat back down, picked up my book. Thanks for the update, Marcus. Send me the bill. Will do. And Harold. Yeah. You're cruel, but you're not wrong. For what that's worth. Coming from you. That's almost a compliment. After he hung up, I sat there for a while, not reading, just thinking. Clara was hysterical. Miles was panicking. Reality was setting in. And somewhere in that house, my old house, Trevor was probably trying to explain how this was all part of some larger lesson about manifesting abundance or whatever nonsense he peddles. I poured myself another scotch. This was going to get worse before it got better. But I'd built my entire career on patience and long-term thinking. I could wait. The question was, could Miles? I wasn't actually there to witness the panic at the gates. That would have been too theatrical, too confrontational, and honestly beneath my dignity. But my security system sure as hell was. And thanks to the miracle of modern technology and my perhaps excessive investment in high-definition cameras with cloud backup, I got to watch the whole beautiful disaster unfold from my new downtown loft approximately 45 minutes after it happened. Let me set the scene for you. It was 9:30 on a Saturday morning. That specific time when reasonable people are either sleeping in or having leisurely brunches, not driving across town to ambush their ex-husbands at property they no longer have access to. But Clara has never been accused of being reasonable, especially when she's in full panic mode. My phone pinged with a motion alert from the estate's front gate. The estate I'd moved out of 3 weeks prior, right after executing Clause 17.4, because I believe in strategic relocations, and also because that house had too many memories of a marriage that died slowly and painfully. I was in the middle of my morning espresso, still in my robe, reading the Wall Street Journal like a civilized human being, when I pulled up the security feed on my tablet. And there it was, Clara's white Mercedes SUV, the one I'd paid for, naturally, pulled up to the front gate with Miles in the passenger seat. Both of them looked like they'd dressed in a hurry. Clara was wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her hair in a messy bun that was trying to be fashionably messy, but just looked panicked. Miles had on a hoodie and sweatpants, the universal uniform of teenagers who've just realized they've screwed up catastrophically. I turned up the volume on the tablet to hear the audio feed. Clara was leaning out of her window, jabbing at the intercom button like it had personally offended her. The gate, of course, remained closed, because I'd had all the access codes changed the day after the severance protocol executed. I'm not an idiot. I knew this confrontation was coming eventually. I just didn't expect it to happen at my old house, which showed a fundamental misunderstanding of how thoroughly I'd planned my exit. Harold, Clara's voice crackled through the intercom speaker, shrill and demanding. Harold, I know you're in there. We need to talk. This is important. It's about Miles's future. Silence from the house, obviously, because I wasn't there and hadn't been for weeks. The property was currently listed with a realtor. I was selling it, couldn't stand to look at it anymore. And the only people with access were my real estate agent and the cleaning service that came twice a week to maintain showing condition. Clara pressed the button again, held it down this time. Harold Caldwell, you open this gate right now? We need to discuss this situation like adults. You can't just ignore us. Oh, but I could. And I was. From a comfortable distance, with excellent espresso and zero obligation to engage with their panic. Miles was leaning forward in his seat, staring at the gate like he could will it open through sheer teenage angst. I zoomed in the camera, because yes, I'd invested in PTZ cameras with 40x optical zoom. And yes, that was probably overkill, but moments like this made it worth every penny, and got a clear view of his face. He looked stressed. Good. Clara tried the old gate code, the one that had worked for the entire duration of our marriage. The keypad blinked red. Denied. She tried it again, slower this time, like maybe she'd misremembered. Red light. Denied. I watched her face cycle through confusion, frustration, and then dawning realization that I'd actually changed the codes, that I'd actually locked them out, that this wasn't just a misunderstanding or technical glitch, but a deliberate choice. He changed the code, Miles said, and even through the security camera audio, I could hear the disbelief in his voice. He actually changed the code. Of course he changed the code, Clara snapped, and her voice had that edge it gets when she's about 5 minutes away from a full meltdown. Your father is petty and vindictive and apparently willing to lock out his own son over a disagreement. A disagreement. She called the complete legal severance of our son from the family trust a disagreement. Like we were arguing about where to eat dinner, not the systematic dismantling of Miles's entire financial future. The delusion was almost impressive. Clara laid on the horn, just held it down, letting it blare across the property like that was going to accomplish anything except annoying the neighbors. Mrs. Davenport next door was probably already composing a strongly worded email to the HOA about noise disturbances. The horn echoed off the stone walls of the estate, and I actually laughed out loud in my loft, alone, watching this performance of desperation play out in high definition. After about 30 seconds of honking, which must have felt like an hour to Miles, who I could see physically cringing in the passenger seat, Clara stopped. She put the car in park, turned off the engine, gripped the steering wheel with both hands, and just sat there, staring at the gate like it might spontaneously open if she looked angry enough. That's when Mrs. Davenport appeared, right on schedule, walking her miniature poodle Toulouse down the sidewalk like she did every Saturday morning at precisely 9:45. Mrs. Davenport is 83 years old, has lived in that neighborhood since 1967, and knows everything about everyone. She also happens to think I'm such a nice young man because I helped her carry groceries once and didn't talk down to her about technology. She's Team Harold, in other words, which made what happened next even more delicious. Clara, spotting another human being who might have information, practically jumped out of her SUV. She smoothed down her sweater, arranged her face into something approximating a friendly expression, and approached Mrs. Davenport with that fake casual energy of someone pretending this was a totally normal Saturday morning encounter. "Oh, hi." Clara's voice went up half an octave into her talking to strangers register. "Mrs. Davenport, right? I'm Clara, I'm Harold's ex-wife. Is he home? We've been trying to reach him." Mrs. Davenport stopped walking, and Toulouse sniffed suspiciously at Clara's shoes like even the dog knew something was off. The old woman looked at Clara with that particular expression elderly people get when they're about to deliver information they know will cause distress and are kind of enjoying it. "Harold?" she said, her voice carrying clearly to the security camera. "Oh dear, Harold hasn't lived here for weeks now. He moved out. Let me think, must have been 3 weeks ago. Such a shame, really. He was such a good neighbor." I watched Clara's face on the screen. It went through about 5 different emotions in 2 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, shock, anger, and finally this kind of desperate denial. Moved? No, that can't be right. This is his house. He's lived here for 15 years. Was his house. Mrs. Davenport corrected gently but firmly. I saw the moving trucks myself. 2 of them, very professional operation. He was supervising everything personally, made sure they were careful with his antique furniture. Such a gentleman, that man. Miles had gotten out of the car now, was standing on the sidewalk looking like his entire world was tilting sideways. Which, to be fair, it was. "Did he say where he was moving to?" he asked, and his voice cracked slightly on moving, which would have been touching if he hadn't put himself in this situation. Mrs. Davenport smiled at Miles with grandmotherly sympathy. He didn't mention specifics, just said he needed a fresh start. "Can't say I blame him after everything he's been through." She said this last part with a pointed look at Clara, because Mrs. Davenport absolutely knew about the divorce and had opinions about it. Such a shame when families fall apart. Clara's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "But he has to tell us where he's living. He has a son. You can't just disappear when you have a child." "I'm sure you can reach him through his attorney," Mrs. Davenport said primly, and I could tell she was enjoying this way more than she should. "That's what my late husband always said. Legal matters should go through proper channels. Now if you'll excuse me, Toulouse needs his walk." She continued down the sidewalk, leaving Clara and Miles standing there in front of the closed gate like visitors to a museum that was permanently closed. Clara turned back to look at the house, my old house, the house she'd kicked me out of during the divorce, the house she'd probably driven past regularly feeling smug about. And I could see the exact moment reality hit her. Miles walked back to the gate, pressed his face against the iron bars like a kid looking into a toy store he couldn't afford. "He's really gone," he said quietly. "He actually left." "Of course he left," Clara said, but her voice was shaky now, the confidence evaporating. "This is what he does. He runs away when things get difficult. Classic Harold behavior." I almost dropped my tablet. Classic Harold behavior? I'd stayed through 15 years of marriage, supported her through 2 failed business ventures, tolerated her yoga instructor affair for 6 months before she finally admitted it, and paid for everything including the therapy she claimed would save our marriage, but actually just convinced her she deserved better. But sure, I was the one who ran away when things got difficult. They stood there for another few minutes, Clara making phone calls that clearly weren't being answered. Probably trying my cell, which I temporarily routed to voicemail for exactly this reason, while Miles just stared at the house like it might give him answers. Finally, mercifully, Clara got back in the SUV. Miles followed, moving like someone in a dream, or maybe a nightmare. As they drove away, I rewound the footage and watched it again, because I'm petty and it was incredibly satisfying. The confusion when the code didn't work. The desperation in Clara's voice. Mrs. Davenport's perfectly delivered revelation. Miles's face when he realized I'd actually left. It was better than anything I could have planned if I'd been there in person. I made myself another espresso, pulled up my phone, and sent a text to Marcus. They tried to visit the old house this morning. Security footage is archived and saved. Clara looked appropriately panicked. His response came 30 seconds later. You're actually enjoying this, aren't you? I typed back. I'm enjoying my coffee. The panic is just a pleasant bonus. Because that's the thing about consequences. They're not about revenge or cruelty or punishment. They're about clarity. Clara and Miles had spent weeks operating under the assumption that this was temporary, that I was bluffing, that eventually I'd cave and restore everything, because that's what fathers do, right? They forgive. They relent. They put their kids' needs above their own hurt. But I wasn't forgiving yet. I wasn't relenting. And my son's needs, his actual needs, not his wants, included learning that actions have permanent consequences, that legacy isn't something you can discard and then reclaim when it's convenient, and that some decisions can't be undone with an apology and a sad face. They'd come to the gate expecting confrontation or negotiation. Instead, they got an empty house and an elderly woman with a poodle delivering the news that I'd moved on. Literally, physically relocated my entire life away from them. That message was clearer than anything I could have said in person. You wanted independence from me? You got it. Welcome to what that actually means. 3 weeks later, my nephew Ben decided to get engaged, which meant the Caldwell family was gathering for one of those rooftop soirees that cost more than most people's weddings. String lights, champagne fountains, a jazz quartet playing in the corner, the whole 9 yards of upper-class celebration. I arrived fashionably late, wearing my best suit, ready to toast young love and watch my son squirm. Miles showed up even later, around 8:30, wearing sneakers with his dress pants like he was making some kind of statement about nonconformity. Clara and Trevor weren't with him. Interesting. He'd come alone, probably thinking he could blend into the crowd, grab some free food, and avoid the family members who definitely heard about his little name-change adventure. He was wrong about that blending in thing. I watched from across the rooftop as he made awkward small talk with cousin Sarah, who kept glancing at him like he was a fascinating zoo exhibit. Then a man in a gray suit, one of Marcus's associates, perfectly timed, approached Miles with a manila envelope. Official-looking. Ominous. Miles Caldwell? The man asked, loud enough that nearby conversation stopped. It's Hartwell now, Miles stammered. The man smiled thinly. Not according to these documents. He handed over the envelope and walked away. Miles opened it right there, hands shaking slightly. I'd had Marcus prepare the contents personally. A copy of the signed waiver, a detailed list of every single thing he'd lost, properties, funds, scholarships, all itemized with dollar amounts. And at the bottom, my handwritten note on Caldwell family letterhead. Blood matters, but names carry the weight. You gave yours away. The rooftop went silent. Even the jazz quartet seemed to pause mid-song. Ben's fiancée froze with her champagne glass halfway to her lips. Cousin Sarah's eyes went wide. And then my father, Miles's grandfather, the family patriarch, stood up from his table, looked directly at Miles with an expression of profound disappointment, and walked out without saying a single word. No yelling, no scene, just silence and the sound of expensive shoes on tile as the old man left his own grandson standing there holding proof of his stupidity. Other family members started looking away, suddenly very interested in their drinks or the view or literally anything except the teenager who'd just been publicly reminded of his catastrophic mistake. Miles stood there, envelope trembling in his hands, face going red, and I could see the exact moment he realized something crucial. This wasn't just about money. It was about erasure. He wasn't being punished. He was being erased from the family legacy he'd rejected. And everyone here knew it. Losing a name hits different than losing money. Money disappears all at once. One day it's there, the next it's gone. But a name? That erodes slowly, like watching a coastline crumble into the ocean one grain of sand at a time. First, people just stopped replying to Miles's texts. Family group chats went quiet when he posted. Cousin Ben's replies got shorter, more polite, more distant. Then the invitations dried up. Birthday parties he used to be automatically included in, family dinners, holiday gatherings. His phone got quieter each week. The family scholarship he'd been counting on for college? Revoked, with a formal letter explaining that only Caldwell descendants in good standing qualified. His cushy internship at Cousin Ben's startup, the one that was supposed to pad his resume? Gone. Ben sent a brief email. We're restructuring. Thanks for your interest. Even his birthday that year was different. Quiet. A text from Clara, a card from Trevor with a Starbucks gift card inside. That was it. No family dinner, no gathering, no grandfather calling with stock tips and life advice. Trevor stopped calling him buddy. Started calling him man, in that distant way you talk to acquaintances you're not particularly invested in. Good luck with that, man. Hope it works out, man. The mentorship had apparently expired along with the trust fund. Finally, 6 weeks after the engagement party, Miles texted me, Dad, I'm sorry. Can we talk? I read it 3 times. Didn't respond. Not because I was cruel, but because silence teaches longer lessons than lectures ever could. He found me 2 weeks later at Ashton Botanical Garden, trimming roses in the early morning sun. Peaceful. Quiet. No drama. Just pruning shears and the smell of fresh earth. Miles approached slowly, like I might bolt. Dad, I didn't mean it. It was just a stupid moment. I snipped a branch clean, examined the cut. And that's the thing, Miles. Stupid moments can cost entire futures. I moved to the next bush, not looking at him. You wanted to make a statement. You made it. Loudly. Publicly. With hashtags. Can I change it back? His voice cracked. The name. Everything. I finally looked at him. Really looked. He'd lost weight. Had circles under his eyes. Looked older somehow. You can change your name on paper, son. File the forms, pay the fees. But you can't erase the... At my wife's work celebration dinner, I went to the bathroom. 2 women walked in, her college friends. Not seeing me in the stall. One said, Poor thing, he doesn't know she's filing for divorce next week. My stomach dropped. I returned to the table smiling and handed her a red envelope. She opened it beaming. Until she read it. Her face turned white. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and for about 3 glorious seconds, you actually believe you're somebody important? Yeah, that's exactly how I felt strutting into Lamont Steakhouse on that crisp Thursday evening in downtown Pittsburgh. The valet took my keys like I was driving something fancier than a 2019 Honda Accord with a questionable check engine light. And for a moment, just a brief, shining moment, I felt like the main character in my own life story. Spoiler alert, I was about to get demoted to extra number 3 real fast, and the director didn't even have the decency to warn me before yelling cut. Lamont's isn't your average chain restaurant where you can get away with wearing cargo shorts and pretending the menu prices don't make you sweat. No, this place screams old money and new pretension. We're talking cloth napkins so thick and luxurious, you could legitimately fashion them into a winter coat if society collapsed tomorrow. The lighting was that perfect dim amber that makes everyone look like they've either just gotten back from a Caribbean vacation or made a deal with a very reasonable demon. The kind of establishment where the waiters have better posture than most people's life choices, and the wine list requires a small business loan to navigate. But hey, tonight wasn't about me and my humble government employee salary. Tonight was all about Clara Brooks. Well, Clara Brooks for now, though I didn't know the expiration date on that last name was coming up faster than expired milk. My wife. My college sweetheart. The woman I'd supported through med school, career changes, and that weird phase where she tried to become a lifestyle influencer. She'd just been promoted to CEO of Morrison & Klein Consulting, and apparently, that warranted gathering every single person in her professional and personal orbit to celebrate like she'd just discovered the cure for Mondays. The guest list was a greatest hits album of people I'd learned to tolerate over the years. There was Richard Morrison, her boss, or former boss, I guess, since she was technically his equal now, a silver-haired guy who probably showered in cologne that cost more than my monthly car payment. Clara's parents were there too, sitting ramrod straight like they were attending a state dinner instead of a steakhouse celebration. Her mother, Patricia, had that look on her face that she always wore around me, like she was perpetually surprised her daughter had married someone who shops at Target. Her father, Donald, was at least decent enough to shake my hand earlier, though his grip suggested he was still trying to figure out if I was good enough for his little girl. Spoiler number 2. Apparently, I wasn't, but neither was she, so I guess we were even. Then there was the PR team from Morrison & Klein. 3 interchangeable people in expensive suits who'd spent the entire appetizer course talking about brand synergy and leveraging Clara's narrative. I nodded along like I understood what any of that corporate word salad meant. But honestly, I was just trying to figure out if it was socially acceptable to order a third beer or if that would make me look like the working-class disappointment Patricia already thought I was. But the real stars of tonight's disaster preview? Tanya Chun and Bree Mitchell, Clara's college friends, and coincidentally, the two people on planet Earth who looked at me like I was a mistake that needed correcting. Tanya was in finance, which she reminded everyone of approximately every 11 minutes, and Bree worked in marketing for some startup that definitely wasn't as successful as she pretended it was on Instagram. They'd never liked me, not since Clara brought me home during sophomore year, and I'd committed the unforgivable sin of being too normal for their taste. Too normal. Like that was somehow worse than being a pretentious ass. I played my part, though, because that's what you do when you love someone, right? I smiled until my face hurt, nodded enthusiastically at Clara's fourth rendition of her Women in Leadership in Male-Dominated Industries speech, which, don't get me wrong, was genuinely inspiring the first time, but by round four it was like hearing your favorite song overplayed on the radio until you wanted to throw the speakers out a window. I laughed at Richard's mediocre jokes about work-life integration and pretended I didn't notice Tanya and Bree whispering to each other every time I spoke, like I was some kind of exotic zoo animal that had accidentally learned human language. By the time dessert menus were being passed around, I needed a break before I said something that would get me divorced even faster than whatever timeline was apparently already in motion. "Excuse me for a minute," I announced to the table, standing up with what I hoped looked like casual confidence and not the desperate energy of a man who'd consumed too much garlic bread and needed to escape before he said something he'd regret. Clara barely glanced up from her conversation with Richard about quarterly projections, just gave me that absent-minded sure, honey, smile that she'd perfected over the past year. The bathroom at Lamont's was almost as fancy as the dining room, all marble countertops and automatic everything, like even taking a leak needed to be a luxury experience. I locked myself in one of the stalls. Not because I actually needed to use it, but because I needed exactly 90 seconds of solitude to collect myself and remember why I was putting up with this circus. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to center myself like one of those meditation apps Clara was always trying to get me to use. That's when I heard them. Heels clicking on tile, laughter echoing off the marble, and voices I recognized immediately. Tanya and Bree had walked into the bathroom. Well, the vestibule area outside the stalls, where apparently the universe had decided to host the most important conversation of my life. I froze. Not because I'm some kind of creep who hangs out in bathroom stalls eavesdropping. Let's be clear about that. But because opening the door and walking out at that exact moment would have been more awkward than a middle school dance, and my social anxiety made executive decisions without consulting me first. So I stayed put, phone in hand, trying to look like I was genuinely occupied if anyone happened to check under the door, and prayed they'd finish whatever mundane conversation they were having and leave. God, I almost feel bad for him, Tanya said, and I heard the unmistakable sound of a makeup compact snapping open. My stomach did a weird flip because when people start a sentence with, "I almost feel bad," nothing good ever follows. Bree laughed, and it was that specific kind of rich person laugh that sounds like champagne bubbles and bad intentions. Almost. Girl, please. He has no idea what's coming. I stopped breathing. Completely stopped. If someone had checked my vitals right then, they would have called a code blue. Poor thing. Tanya continued, and I could practically hear her reapplying lipstick between words. Walking around here all supportive husband, smiling like a golden retriever, and he doesn't even know she's filing for divorce next week. The phone nearly slipped out of my hand. Divorce. Next week. The words hit me like a freight train made of betrayal and overpriced steak. My wife, the woman I'd spent 7 years building a life with, the person I'd supported through career changes and family drama, and that weird pyramid scheme phase her cousin tried to drag her into, was planning to divorce me. And apparently, everyone knew except the guy who actually needed to know. Clara's playing it so smart, Bree added, and I heard a purse zipper. Waiting until after the promotion bonus clears next Friday. She told me she's already got the papers drafted, just waiting for the money to hit her account, and then boom, served. They both laughed, casual as discussing weekend brunch plans, and then their voices faded as they walked back toward the dining room. leaving me sitting in a bathroom stall at a fancy steakhouse, staring at the door like it might offer me some kind of explanation for what the hell had just happened to my life. I don't know how long I sat there. Could have been 30 seconds, could have been 10 minutes. Time does weird things when your entire reality shifts sideways. Eventually, I stood up, flushed the toilet for authenticity's sake, because even in crisis, I'm unnecessarily considerate, and walked to the sink. The bathroom attendant. Yeah, Lamont's has a bathroom attendant, because of course it does. Offered me a towel with a sympathetic smile, like he could sense the existential crisis radiating off me. I washed my hands twice. Not because they were particularly dirty, but because I needed the ritual of it, the normalcy, the few extra seconds to stop seeing red and start seeing clearly. When I finally looked up at the mirror, I barely recognized the guy staring back. Same face, same slightly too long haircut I kept meaning to deal with. Same tie Clara had picked out for me that morning. But different eyes. Harder eyes. The eyes of a man who'd just learned he'd been cast as the fool in someone else's master plan. All right, Adrian, I said to my reflection, keeping my voice low so the attendant wouldn't think I'd completely lost it. Time to audit this marriage. Because here's the thing about being a financial analyst for the government. I spend 40 hours a week tracking money, finding discrepancies, uncovering things people desperately want to stay hidden. Numbers don't lie. Paper trails don't forget. And if Clara Brooks thought she could plan an exit strategy without me noticing the evidence, well, she'd severely underestimated exactly who she'd married. I straightened my tie, grabbed a mint from the crystal dish by the door because even righteous fury deserves fresh breath, and headed back to the table with a smile on my face and a plan forming in my head. The show, as they say, was about to begin. Walking back to that table felt like one of those slow-motion movie scenes, except instead of explosions and dramatic music, it was just me navigating between tables of oblivious rich people while my internal soundtrack was screaming static. Every step was calculated. Smile? Check. Shoulders relaxed like I hadn't just discovered my wife was treating our marriage like a corporate merger she was ready to liquidate. Double check. Heart doing Olympic-level gymnastics in my chest while I pretended everything was absolutely fine. Gold medal performance, baby. I slid back into my seat next to Clara, and she looked up at me with those green eyes that I'd once thought were enchanting, but now realized were probably just really good at hiding daggers. She was radiant tonight, I'll give her that. The woman knew how to work a room. Her dress was this emerald silk number that probably cost more than my monthly salary. And yes, I'd bought it for her 3 months ago when she said she needed something powerful for her upcoming promotion announcement. Guess I'd unknowingly funded my own funeral outfit. The irony was so thick you could serve it with the filet mignon. You okay, babe? She asked, reaching over to touch my hand with what I'm sure she thought was genuine concern. Her nails were freshly done, that expensive gel manicure she got every 2 weeks at that salon in Shadyside. I'd always thought it was a waste of money, but hey, what did I know? I was just the guy paying for half of everything while apparently being scheduled for demolition. Never better, I replied, and I watched her face relax into this satisfied smile. She had no idea that in married couple speak, never better is right up there with we need to talk, and it's fine on the list of phrases that actually mean the complete opposite. It's the verbal equivalent of a warning siren, but Clara was too busy basking in her own success to notice the tornado forming right next to her. Her boss, former boss, Richard Morrison cleared his throat and stood up, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor with that sound that makes everyone instinctively look over. He raised his crystal wine glass, the liquid inside catching the amber light like liquid gold, which was fitting because this whole evening was apparently about celebrating how golden Clara's future was about to be. Without me in it. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard announced in that booming voice that rich white guys seem to develop around the same time they get their first corner office. I'd like to propose a toast to Clara Brooks, our brilliant new CEO and the future of Morrison & Klein Consulting. Everyone grabbed their glasses like synchronized swimmers, all smiles and enthusiasm. Patricia, Clara's mother, looked like she might actually cry with pride, which was rich considering she'd spent the better part of 7 years looking at me like I was a participation trophy her daughter had won by accident. Donald raised his glass with both hands, probably because he'd already gone through 2 scotches and was working on his third. The PR team lifted their glasses in unison like they'd rehearsed it, which they probably had because everything these people did seemed calculated down to the nanosecond. Tanya and Bree were grinning like cats who'd just knocked over a fish tank and gotten away with it. Bree had this particular smirk that I now understood was probably less about celebrating Clara and more about the private joke they were all in on. The joke being me. The punchline sitting right here in his moderately priced suit from Men's Warehouse, clinking his glass like a trained seal. To Clara, Richard continued, really milking the moment. A visionary leader, a remarkable strategist, and someone who proves every single day that talent and determination know no gender boundaries. The company is lucky to have you, and I personally couldn't be prouder to call you my colleague. Everyone echoed the toast. To Clara, the sound of crystal clinking filled the private dining room we'd reserved, that specific high-pitched ring that fancy glassware makes when you're paying $40 for a pour. I clinked my glass too, right on cue, the perfect supportive husband executing his role flawlessly. But inside my head, I was already mentally drafting a very different kind of presentation. See, being a financial analyst isn't just about crunching numbers and finding tax discrepancies, though I do plenty of that for the IRS. And let me tell you, people get really creative when they're trying to hide money from Uncle Sam. It's also about pattern recognition. It's about seeing what doesn't add up, following the paper trail, and understanding that everything, absolutely everything, leaves evidence. Numbers are my first language, the thing I learned to speak fluently long before I mastered the art of small talk at dinner parties. And revenge? Revenge was rapidly becoming my second language, and apparently, I was about to become bilingual real fast. While everyone launched into enthusiastic conversation about Clara's promotion, I sat back and just observed. Really observed. This was information gathering time, and I needed to pay attention to every detail like I was auditing someone's taxes and knew they were hiding offshore accounts. Richard started talking about quarterly growth projections, throwing around numbers that were probably accurate, but delivered with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for announcing lottery wins. We're looking at a 37% increase in client retention, he said, gesturing with his wine glass like a conductor leading an orchestra. And with Clara at the helm, I anticipate we'll break into the pharmaceutical consulting market by Q2 next year. Clara was eating it up, nodding along, adding her own insights about leveraging synergies and optimizing operational bandwidth. Corporate speak. That beautiful language where people use 20 words to say absolutely nothing of substance. It's like they take normal English, run it through a translator's set to pretentious nonsense, and then serve it up like it's profound wisdom. Synergy, bandwidth, paradigm shifts, all fancy ways of saying, we're going to try stuff and hope it works. I smiled and nodded, playing my part. The supportive husband who definitely understood what leveraging cross-functional integration meant. Sure. Absolutely. I was leveraging my own cross-functional integration right now between wanting to flip the table and maintaining enough composure to execute what was rapidly forming in my mind. Tanya leaned over to Clara and said something I couldn't quite hear, but whatever it was made both of them laugh. That knowing laugh. The kind that comes with inside jokes and shared secrets. Bree joined in, adding her own comment. And suddenly all three of them were giggling like they were back in their college sorority house instead of a professional dinner celebrating corporate achievement. I wondered if they were laughing about me. Probably. The clueless husband who had no idea his marriage had an expiration date stamped on it like grocery store meat. The waiter appeared with dessert menus, those oversized leather-bound books that fancy restaurants use because apparently, listing 5 desserts on a regular piece of paper isn't sophisticated enough. Clara ordered the creme brulee without even looking at the menu. Her usual choice, the safe bet, the thing she always ordered because she didn't like taking risks with dessert. Funny how she was perfectly comfortable taking massive risks with, say, our marriage, but God forbid she try the chocolate souffle. Patricia ordered the fruit tart, because of course she did. Tanya and Bree decided to split the chocolate lava cake, which involved way too much discussion and negotiation for 2 people who were supposedly best friends. Richard waved off dessert entirely, probably watching his figure for his next executive photo shoot. Donald ordered another scotch, which wasn't technically dessert, but nobody was about to argue with him. I ordered the tiramisu, mostly because it gave me something to do with my hands and my mouth besides what I really wanted to do, which was stand up and announce to the entire table that I'd just overheard their little bathroom conspiracy. But that wasn't the play. Not yet. The thing about revenge, and I was learning this in real time, is that timing is everything. Rush it, and you blow the whole operation. Wait too long, and you lose your advantage. So instead, I sat there mentally building what I'd started calling my surprise package presentation. See, while everyone else was talking about Clara's brilliant future, I was calculating exactly what that future would look like without the safety net she thought she had. I was thinking about joint accounts, shared assets, the house we'd bought together 3 years ago in Squirrel Hill. I was remembering every late-night work session she'd claimed to have over the past 6 months, every unexplained charge on the credit card, every time she'd come home smelling like cologne that definitely wasn't mine. The desserts arrived, and Clara made a show of feeding me a spoonful of her creme brulee, that cute couple thing we'd done 1,000 times before. "Isn't it amazing?" she asked, her eyes bright with champagne and success and the confidence of someone who thought she was 3 steps ahead of everyone else. I smiled, tasting the burnt sugar and vanilla cream. "It's perfect," I said. "Absolutely perfect." And I meant it, because everything was falling into place. Every piece of information, every observation, every detail I'd been unconsciously collecting over the past months was suddenly crystallizing into a beautiful, terrible picture. Clara thought she was the chess master here, moving pieces around the board while I sat obliviously in checkmate. But here's what she forgot. I count things for a living. I notice discrepancies. I see patterns. And I've been noticing a lot lately. So while everyone toasted my wife and celebrated her ascension to CEO, while they talked about her brilliant future and her incredible achievement, I sat there with my tiramisu and my forced smile, quietly building a PowerPoint presentation in my head. Title slide: Surprises You Deserve, a comprehensive analysis of why you should have been more careful. The dessert course couldn't end fast enough. Dessert was winding down, and I could feel the evening starting to shift into that awkward phase where people aren't sure if they should order another drink or start making their polite exit excuses. Richard was checking his phone with that subtle glance that says, "I'm important and might need to handle business at any moment," which was probably just him checking his fantasy football scores. Patricia was dabbing her mouth with that ridiculously thick napkin, preparing her inevitable speech about how proud she was of Clara and how far she'd come. Donald was working on what I'm pretty sure was his 4th scotch, which meant he'd soon enter the phase where he'd start telling rambling stories about his own career in pharmaceutical sales back in the 80s. But me? I was in the zone. That special headspace where everything becomes crystal clear and time moves differently. Athletes call it flow state. Surgeons experience it during complicated operations. I was having it right now at a steakhouse table, surrounded by people who'd written me off as background noise, and I was about to deliver the performance of a lifetime. I reached into my inner jacket pocket slowly, deliberately, like I was going for something precious, which I was, technically, just not in the way anyone at this table would expect. My fingers wrapped around the red envelope I'd placed there earlier that evening, back when I'd still been that naive version of myself who thought tonight was just about celebrating my wife's success. Funny how much a person can change in the span of a bathroom eavesdropping session. The envelope was red because I'd specifically gone to 3 different stores to find the perfect shade. Not pink, not orange red, but that deep crimson that screams important occasion. The kind of red you see on Valentine's Day cards and warning signs. Appropriate for both love and danger, which was poetic as hell, if I did say so myself. I'd spent an embarrassing amount of time selecting it at Staples while the teenage cashier watched me compare different shades like I was picking out paint for the Sistine Chapel. "Everyone," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. Clear, confident. The voice of a man who'd found his purpose somewhere between the appetizers and the conspiracy revelation. "Before we wrap up this amazing celebration, I have something for Clara too." The table went quiet, that anticipatory kind of silence that happens when people think something sweet is about to occur. Patricia's face lit up like I'd just announced I was donating a kidney. Even Richard looked interested, probably assuming I'd gotten Clara some expensive piece of jewelry that would make him look bad for only giving her a promotion. Clara's hand went to her chest in that exaggerated surprise gesture women do in jewelry commercials. "Oh my God, Adrian." she said, and her voice had that pitch that suggested she was genuinely touched. You didn't have to do anything. This night is already perfect. Oh, I really did, I replied, and I let that sentence hang in the air for just a second longer than necessary. Just long enough for the meaning to slip past her champagne-buzzed defenses, but not long enough for her to actually process it. I couldn't let tonight pass without giving you something special. Something you deserve. I pulled out the red envelope and held it in both hands, presenting it to her like it was the Olympic torch or the nuclear launch codes. The table leaned in. Even Tanya and Bree, who'd spent most of the evening whispering to each other like mean girls in a high school cafeteria, were watching with interest. They probably thought I'd gotten Clara some romantic getaway trip or maybe a heartfelt letter expressing my undying support for her career. How adorable. How completely, devastatingly wrong. Clara took the envelope from my hands, her fingers brushing against mine in that familiar way that used to give me butterflies, but now just made me think about all the other hands she'd been holding lately. Her smile was radiant, genuine, the smile of someone who thought they were winning at life. She looked around the table, making sure everyone was watching her moment, because Clara had always loved an audience, always needed validation from the room. It was one of the things that had driven me crazy about her, this constant need for external approval. Should I open it now? She asked, playing coy, probably expecting me to suggest she wait until we got home for something more private and intimate. Absolutely, I said, leaning back in my chair with my arms crossed. I think everyone here should see this. After all, we're all family, right? All friends. All people who care about Clara's future. I made sure to make eye contact with Tanya when I said that last part. She smiled back, oblivious, probably thinking I was just being sentimental. Bree raised her wine glass slightly in acknowledgement, like she was toasting my devotion. The irony was so delicious I could taste it better than the tiramisu. Clara's perfectly manicured nails, the ones I'd indirectly paid for with our joint checking account, slid under the envelope flap. She was taking her time, savoring the moment, because she genuinely believed whatever was inside would be something wonderful. A love letter maybe. Concert tickets to see her favorite band. A reservation at some five-star resort where we could celebrate her promotion properly. The envelope opened with that satisfying paper tear sound, and Clara reached inside. I watched her face with the intensity of a scientist observing a chemical reaction, because I knew exactly what was about to happen, and I wanted to memorize every microsecond of it. Her hand emerged holding papers. Multiple sheets, neatly printed on official-looking letterhead. Her eyes scanned the first page, and I saw the exact moment comprehension hit her brain. It was like watching someone get unplugged from the Matrix. That split second where reality crashes through delusion like a wrecking ball through drywall. Her smile didn't just fade, it evaporated. Completely disappeared like it had never existed in the first place. Her skin, which had been glowing with champagne flush and success, drained of color so fast I briefly worried she might actually pass out. She went from woman on top of the world to person who just realized the world is actively collapsing beneath her in approximately 2 seconds flat. Adrian, she whispered, and her voice had lost all that confident CO authority. Now she just sounded small, confused. What is this? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table like we were having a casual conversation about weekend plans instead of the nuclear detonation of our marriage. Oh, just some light reading material. I thought it might pair well with the creme brulee. You know, something bitter to complement the sweet. Her hands were shaking now as she flipped through the pages. Page 1. Bank statements from the secret savings account she'd opened 6 months ago. The one she thought I didn't know about, where she'd been funneling money from our joint checking. Small amounts, 50 here, 100 there, nothing dramatic enough to trigger immediate suspicion. But over 6 months? It added up to almost $8,000. My $8,000, our $8,000, that she'd been stockpiling for her post-divorce independence fund. Page 2. Screenshots of email exchanges between her and Ethan Price, her harmless work mentor. And let me tell you, these emails were anything but harmless. They weren't quite explicit enough to be pornographic, but they sure as hell weren't professional either. Can't stop thinking about our meeting yesterday, and you make these late nights worthwhile, and my personal favorite. My husband doesn't understand me the way you do. Classic affair lines, the greatest hits of infidelity, wrapped up in timestamps that corresponded with all those nights she'd told me she was working late on the Morrison account. Page 3. More email screenshots. These ones detailing dinner reservations at restaurants I'd never been to, hotel stays charged to the company card under client development, and a particularly damning exchange where Clara told Ethan she was just waiting for the right time to make her exit. And page 4. Oh, page 4 was my masterpiece. Legal documentation, properly notarized and filed with the Allegheny County Court of Common Pleas, showing that I, Adrian Michael Brooks, had filed for divorce from Clara Elizabeth Brooks 2 days ago. Wednesday afternoon, to be precise, at 2:47 p.m., while she'd been in her big promotion announcement meeting. Her boss Richard was starting to look uncomfortable, his executive smile wavering like bad Wi-Fi. He leaned slightly toward Clara, trying to see what had caused such a dramatic reaction, but she clutched the papers to her chest like they were nuclear secrets. "Something wrong, honey?" I asked, and I made sure my voice was dripping with the kind of sweetness usually reserved for talking to toddlers or customer service representatives you're about to destroy with a perfectly worded complaint. "You look a little pale. Should I get you some water? Maybe some truth serum?" "Oh wait, looks like you've already got plenty of truth right there in your hands." Patricia had her hand over her mouth, her eyes darting between Clara and me like she was watching a tennis match played with emotional grenades. Donald had actually set down his scotch, which for him was the equivalent of a 5-alarm emergency. The PR team had gone completely silent, probably mentally calculating how this would affect Clara's public image and whether they needed to start drafting crisis management strategies. But Tanya and Bree? Oh, Tanya and Bree were my favorite reactions. They'd gone absolutely rigid, frozen like someone had hit pause on them mid-gossip. Their faces were doing this amazing thing where confusion was battling with horror, was battling with the dawning realization that maybe, just maybe, they shouldn't have been quite so chatty in that bathroom earlier. Clara tried to speak, her mouth opening and closing like a fish that had just realized it was no longer in water. "Adrian, this isn't, you don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I interrupted, keeping my voice calm and measured. "I understand that you've been planning an exit strategy for months. I understand that you wanted to wait until your promotion bonus cleared. Next Friday, right? That's when the money hits. I understand that you've been playing the devoted wife while essentially building a divorce starter kit behind my back." I picked up my wine glass and took a leisurely sip, letting the moment breathe. "The thing is, Clara, you made one crucial miscalculation. The silence at that table was so thick you could have packaged it and sold it as insulation. Nobody was breathing. Nobody was moving. I'm pretty sure someone's watch stopped ticking out of pure shock. Even the waiter who'd been hovering nearby with a coffee pot had frozen mid-step like a really well-dressed statue, probably trying to decide if he should intervene or just let this train wreck play out so he'd have an incredible story for his other tables. Clara's eyes were darting around like a cornered animal looking for an escape route, but there wasn't one. Not at this table, not in this restaurant, not in this situation. She'd walked in here tonight thinking she was the queen on the chessboard, and she was just now realizing she'd been in checkmate for the last 3 moves without even knowing it. What miscalculation?" she finally managed to whisper, and I had to give her credit for even being able to form words at this point. Her voice was shaking so badly it sounded like she was trying to talk during an earthquake. I set down my wine glass with deliberate care, making sure it made that satisfying little clink against the table. "You married a financial analyst, sweetheart. Someone whose entire job is finding money that people are trying to hide, following paper trails, spotting patterns, connecting dots." I gestured at the papers still clutched in her trembling hands. "You really thought you could open a secret savings account, use our joint checking to fund it, and I wouldn't notice? That's like trying to shoplift from a security guard. It's not just stupid, it's impressively stupid." Richard Morrison had gone from uncomfortable to actively panicking. His face had that expression people get when they realize they're watching something career-ending happen in real time. He cleared his throat, trying to assert some kind of authority in a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond anyone's control. "Perhaps we should." "Oh no, Richard," I said, turning to face him with a smile that could have cut glass. "Don't leave on my account. This is a celebration, remember? We're celebrating Clara's promotion, her success, her incredible future. Stay? Enjoy the show. I promise it's worth the price of admission, and considering you're paying for this dinner, you might as well get your money's worth. Patricia had recovered enough to try the maternal intervention approach. Adrian, I think maybe you and Clara should discuss this privately. Privately. I laughed, and it came out harsher than I intended, but honestly, harsh felt pretty appropriate right now. Patricia, with all due respect, and I mean that in the most technical sense of the phrase, privacy went out the window the moment your daughter decided to plan my removal from her life, like I was a bad piece of furniture she needed to donate to Goodwill. Besides, everyone here already knew about the divorce except me, right? So why start with privacy now? That got a reaction. Patricia's mouth snapped shut so fast I heard her teeth click. Donald reached for his scotch with both hands like it was a life preserver. And Tanya, beautiful, gossipy Tanya, had gone so pale she looked like she'd just seen her bank account after a Vegas weekend. I turned my attention to Clara's two best friends. These women who'd spent years looking down their noses at me like I was something unfortunate they'd stepped in. Speaking of everyone knowing, Tanya, Bree, how's the bathroom at Lamont's? Nice acoustics in there, right? Really carries a conversation. Bree's wine glass slipped from her fingers, not shattering, but landing on the table with a thud that splashed Merlot onto the white tablecloth like a crime scene. Tanya had gone from pale to red, that particular shade of crimson that happens when someone realizes they've been caught doing something monumentally stupid. The bathroom, Tanya started, then stopped, her brain clearly trying to calculate exactly how much I'd heard and how completely screwed she was. Yeah, the bathroom, I confirmed, nodding slowly. You know, the one where you two were touching up your makeup and discussing how poor Adrian doesn't even know his wife is filing for divorce next week. How Clara's playing it so cool, waiting for the bonus to clear before serving me papers. That bathroom. Ring any bells? Clara made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a whimper. She turned on her friends with a look of pure betrayal, and honestly, it was almost funny watching her experience what betrayal felt like after she'd been dishing it out for months. You told him? They didn't tell me directly. I clarified, because accuracy matters, even in the middle of nuclear warfare. They just happened to have their little gossip session while I was occupying a stall, wondering if I'd eaten too much garlic bread. Which, for the record, you can never eat too much garlic bread. That's a myth. But I digress. I picked up the papers that Clara had dropped onto the table, holding them up like I was presenting evidence in court. See, here's the thing that really gets me. It's not just that you want it out. Marriages end. People fall out of love. That happens, and it sucks, but it's life. I made eye contact with her, really looked at her, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the woman I'd fallen in love with in college. The pre-law student who'd laughed at my terrible jokes and stayed up with me studying for finals and promised we'd figure out life together. But that woman was gone, or maybe she'd never really existed outside my imagination. What gets me is the calculation of it all. The strategy. Waiting for the money. Hiding accounts. The fact that you turned our marriage into a business transaction that you were quietly liquidating while still playing the loving wife. The PR team was trying to make themselves invisible, which is impressive for three people sitting at a table. They'd pulled out their phones and were clearly texting each other, probably already drafting crisis management strategies for how to spin their new CEO's very public marital implosion. And Ethan Price. I continued, flipping to one of the email printouts. You are harmless mentor. Let's talk about Ethan for a second, shall we? Because these emails are really something special. You make these late nights worthwhile, I read aloud, doing my best impression of dramatic narration. Can't stop thinking about our meeting yesterday. And my personal favorite, Clara, this one really tugs at the heartstrings. My husband doesn't understand me the way you do. Clara was crying now, mascara starting to run down her cheeks in those dark streaks that would have been tragic if she hadn't spent the last 6 months systematically destroying our marriage while I smiled and supported her dreams. Adrian, please. Please what? I interrupted. Please stop. Please take this conversation somewhere private so you can try to salvage this disaster. Please pretend none of this happened so we can all go back to our regularly scheduled programming. I shook my head. Nah, I'm good. I've been quiet for months, Clara. Quiet while you worked late. Quiet while charges showed up on the card for restaurants I've never been to. Quiet while you slowly checked out of our marriage and started building your escape pod. I think I've earned the right to be a little loud right now. I turned back to the table, addressing everyone like I was giving a presentation at work, which in a way, I guess I was. Page 2 of your gift, Clara, that's the good stuff. That's where I've got documentation of the company laptop being used for personal communications with Ethan, which, unless Morrison & Klein has drastically changed their employee handbook recently, is probably a violation of company policy, especially when those personal communications involve discussing an affair and strategizing about divorcing your spouse. Richard's face had progressed from uncomfortable to actively horrified. You could practically see him mentally flipping through the HR handbook, calculating lawsuits and public relations disasters. The company laptop, he repeated weakly. Oh yeah, I confirmed cheerfully. Time-stamped emails sent from Clara's work computer during work hours, discussing matters that are decidedly not work-related. I'm not a lawyer, but I feel like that might be relevant to somebody. HR maybe? Legal department? Random gossip sites that love this kind of corporate drama. I wasn't actually planning to leak anything to gossip sites. I'm petty, not vindictive, but Richard didn't need to know that. Let him sweat a little. Let him wonder if his shiny new CEO was about to become a liability before she'd even warmed up her executive chair. And here's the real kicker, I said, pulling out the final document with a flourish that would have made a game show host proud. Page 4. Legal documentation showing that I filed for divorce 2 days ago. Wednesday afternoon, while you were in your big promotion meeting, I was sitting in Margaret Chen's office. She's a lawyer, great reviews. You should look her up, filing the paperwork. I even paid extra for expedited processing. Consider it an investment in my future happiness. Clara was full-on sobbing now, and part of me, a very small, very distant part that still remembered loving her, felt bad about doing this so publicly. But that part was being thoroughly outvoted by the rest of me that remembered sitting in that bathroom stall, listening to her friends laugh about how clueless I was. I also took the liberty of consulting with the top 3 divorce attorneys in Pittsburgh, I added casually, like I was discussing weekend plans instead of strategic divorce warfare. Just consultations, you understand. But here's a fun fact about lawyer consultations. Once they've consulted with me, they can't represent you due to conflict of interest. Isn't that interesting? So when you go looking for legal representation, you're going to find your options somewhat limited. Not impossible, just limited. Tanya had her head in her hands. Bree was staring at her lap like she'd find answers in her designer dress. Patricia looked like she wanted to ground both me and Clara, which would have been impressive considering we were both in our 30s. Donald had finished his scotch and was trying to flag down the waiter for another one, probably hoping enough alcohol would erase this entire evening from his memory. I stood up, straightening my tie and buttoning my jacket like I was preparing to leave a business meeting instead of the smoking crater of my marriage. So here's what happens next, Clara. You're going to hear from my lawyer, that's Margaret, remember her name, regarding the actual divorce proceedings. We'll be discussing asset division, which should be interesting considering that house we bought. I put down 70% of the down payment. The car you drive? Title's in my name. That savings account you thought was secret? Joint property, which means I get to claim half in the settlement, which is ironic justice if I've ever seen it. I raised my water glass. I'd switched from wine because I wanted to be completely sober for this, and smiled at the table. So let me propose my own toast. To Clara Brooks, soon to be Clara Bennett again, I suppose. The future ex-wife who taught me that trust is basically a subscription service that auto-renews until you actually check your statements. May your promotion bonus cover your lawyer fees. May Ethan be worth the career consequences. And may you always remember that sometimes the quiet guy keeping the books is paying a lot more attention than you think. Here's the thing about catching someone cheating. It's never one big obvious sign that smacks you in the face like a cartoon frying pan. It's 1,000 tiny things that your brain starts collecting without you even realizing it. Like some kind of subconscious detective working overtime in the background of your mind while you're trying to convince yourself that everything is fine. Spoiler alert, everything was not fine, and my subconscious detective had been screaming at me for months before I finally started paying attention. It started about 6 months ago, right around the beginning of April. Tax season, ironically enough, which is when I'm at my most paranoid about numbers and patterns because I spend 40 hours a week catching people trying to pull fast ones on the IRS. Clara came home one night and announced she'd be working late more often because Morrison & Klein was pursuing this huge pharmaceutical contract, and she needed to be all hands on deck for the pitch process. Made sense. She'd been gunning for a promotion for years, and big contracts meant big opportunities. I was supportive. I made her favorite pasta dinner and told her I'd handle the household stuff while she focused on work. What a guy, right? What a trusting, supportive, absolutely clueless guy. The late nights became a pattern. 3 nights a week turned into 4, then 5. She'd text me around 7 saying she'd be home by 10, then 10 would become 11, then midnight. And look, I get it. Sometimes work genuinely demands that kind of commitment. But here's what my analyst brain started noticing. Her timesheets didn't match her stories. See, Morrison & Klein uses this software called Time Tracker, and Clara had given me access to the family calendar sync feature years ago, so I could see her schedule and plan around it. Useful for coordinating date nights and making sure someone remembered to pick up the dry cleaning. Except the calendar started showing discrepancies. She'd tell me she was working until 11 on the Morrison pitch, but Time Tracker would show her clocking out at 6:30. That's a 4.5-hour gap that needed explaining, and traffic was terrible. Only works as an excuse if you live in Los Angeles, not Pittsburgh. So I started keeping a spreadsheet, because of course I did. I'm an analyst. Spreadsheets are literally my love language. Date, time she said she'd be home, time she actually got home, reason given, timesheet data. Just tracking patterns, telling myself I was being paranoid, and this was a healthy way to work through my anxiety instead of confronting her. Then came the Uber receipts. We have a joint credit card, had a joint credit card. Past tense now feels more appropriate. That we used for pretty much everything because it had good cashback rewards. 2% on dining, 3% on gas, the usual middle-class optimization strategies. I'm the one who reconciles the statements each month because Clara always said she found it tedious, which I now realize was less about tedium and more about not wanting me to look too closely at where money was going. But I do look closely. That's literally what I do for a living. And I started noticing Uber charges that ended at addresses I didn't recognize. Jazz lounges in Lawrenceville, wine bars in Shadyside, a hotel in downtown Pittsburgh, the Fairmont, fancy choice, with a charge labeled as Morrison & Klein Business Development. Except when I cross-referenced that date with her timesheet, she'd been clocked in at the office until 7, and the Uber charge to the Fairmont was at 7:15. Business development that starts after work hours and requires a hotel? That's either the worst planned client meeting in corporate history or something else entirely. The perfume was another tell. Clara has worn the same perfume since college, Marc Jacobs Daisy, that light floral scent that I used to associate with coming home to someone who loved me. But around May, I started noticing different scents on her when she came home late. Heavier, muskier, definitely masculine. The first time, I convinced myself she'd hugged a coworker goodbye and picked up their cologne. The 5th time, that excuse was wearing thinner than my patience. And then there was the phone situation. Clara had always been pretty casual about her phone around me. Left it on the counter while she showered, didn't bother with a passcode for years, the behavior of someone who had nothing to hide. But suddenly, around the same time as the late night started, the phone became surgically attached to her person. She took it everywhere. Bathroom, shower, even to check the mail. She added a 6-digit passcode, and when I casually asked about it, she said something about company security requirements. Plausible, except I knew for a fact that Morrison & Klein didn't have any such requirement because I'd actually read through her employee handbook one night when I couldn't sleep and was looking for answers in all the wrong places. But the real smoking gun, the thing that made me stop lying to myself and start planning, was discovering the secret savings account. That happened completely by accident, which is how the best detective work always happens, apparently. I was looking for our mortgage statement in her home office, and I knocked over a stack of papers on her desk. Basic klutz moment, nothing sinister. But when I was picking everything up, I saw a bank statement from Citizens Bank. We don't bank at Citizens Bank. We bank at PNC, have for years, joint checking and savings, everything transparent and above board. So naturally, I looked at the statement. And there it was, an individual savings account in Clara's name only, opened in March, with deposits that matched exactly the weird little charges I'd been noticing on our joint checking. $50 here for groceries that never materialized in our fridge. $100 there for gas, when her car had a full tank. $75 for pharmacy, when neither of us were on any medications. Death by 1,000 paper cuts, except instead of dying, she was building herself a nice little nest egg. Almost $8,000 by the time I did my full investigation. 8,000 of our dollars, my dollars, our shared resources, quietly being funneled into her escape fund. That's when I stopped being the trusting husband and started being the financial analyst. I went full forensic accountant on our entire financial life. Every receipt, every credit card statement, every transaction for the past 6 months got entered into a master spreadsheet with categories, timestamps, and cross-references. I created a separate encrypted folder on my laptop labeled Tax Documents 2024 because I knew Clara would never voluntarily look at anything tax-related. Inside that folder, a complete dossier of her affair. I tracked the Uber receipts and mapped out the destinations. I noticed that Sophie in her contacts, supposedly a work friend, texted her at weird hours and with a familiarity that felt off. So I did something I'm not particularly proud of but won't apologize for. I checked her laptop, the one issued by Morrison & Klein, which she often left open on the kitchen counter while she was getting ready in the mornings. Company property, technically, which made me feel slightly less guilty about what I was about to do. I didn't hack anything. Didn't need to. Clara's email was already open, and she had the password saved in her browser because she's brilliant at corporate strategy but apparently terrible at digital security. And there they were, months of emails with Ethan Price, her mentor at the firm. The progression was almost textbook, started professional enough, strategy discussions, and client notes. Then it got more personal. Comments about how much they enjoyed working together. Inside jokes. Late-night messages that had nothing to do with work and everything to do with two people who were definitely crossing lines they shouldn't be crossing. The smoking gun email came in June. Clara wrote to Ethan, "I've decided to file after the promotion bonus clears. No point giving him ammunition to go after my money. We've worked too hard to let him take half of everything I've earned." She was talking about me. Her husband. The guy who'd supported her through her career changes and celebrated every win and picked up the slack at home so she could focus on climbing the corporate ladder. I was him, the obstacle between her and Ethan and whatever fantasy future they'd cooked up together. That's when I made the decision. I wasn't going to be the clueless husband who gets blindsided. I wasn't going to wait around for her to serve me papers on her timeline, making me the reactive party scrambling to protect myself. I was going to flip the script so hard she'd get whiplash. First call I made was to Margaret Shun, a divorce attorney in Shadyside with a reputation for being absolutely ruthless but fair. Consultation appointment for the following Tuesday. I took a personal day from work, told Clara I was helping my buddy Mike move furniture, and instead spent 2 hours in Margaret's office laying out everything I'd discovered. She listened, took notes, and at the end said something I'll never forget. Your wife made 3 critical mistakes. 1. She underestimated you. 2. She left a paper trail that would make a breadcrumb trail look subtle. 3. She didn't file first. Let's make sure she regrets all 3. Margaret and I filed on Wednesday afternoon, 2 days before the steakhouse dinner. Rush job, expedited processing, cost me an extra $500, but worth every penny. While Clara was in her promotion announcement meeting, celebrating her ascension to CEO, I was signing paperwork that would make her celebration very short-lived. But I didn't stop there. Margaret had given me a pro tip that bordered on brilliantly petty. Consult with the top divorce attorneys in the city. Just consultations, establish a conflict of interest, make it harder for Clara to find representation. So I spent the next 2 days meeting with lawyers. Daria Hollings at Steel City Family Law, Robert Patterson at Commonwealth Advocates, Jennifer Wu at Pittsburgh Divorce Solutions. Told them all the same story, showed them all the same evidence, paid for consultations I didn't technically need just to lock them out of Clara's reach. Was it playing dirty? Absolutely. Did I care? Not even a little bit. If you think the steakhouse dinner was the grand finale, you'd be wrong. That was just the opening act. The real show started on Monday morning when the corporate machine started chewing up Clara's carefully constructed professional image and spitting it out like bad cafeteria food. I didn't go into work Friday. Took a personal day, stayed home with Max, our golden retriever and the only innocent party in this entire mess, and watched trashy TV while eating ice cream straight from the container like I was the protagonist in a rom-com dealing with a breakup. Except I wasn't sad. I was vindicated. There's a difference, and it tastes a lot better than sadness. Tastes like cookies and cream Haagen-Dazs and the sweet satisfaction of a plan executed flawlessly. But Monday? Monday I walked into my office at the IRS Federal Building in downtown Pittsburgh like I owned the place. And here's the thing about working for the government. Gossip travels faster than our actual internet connection. I hadn't even made it to my desk before people were giving me looks. Not pity looks, which is what I'd expected. These were respect looks. Impressed looks. The kind of looks you give someone who just pulled off something legendary. My cubicle neighbor, Derek Chun, was waiting at my desk with 2 cups of coffee like he'd been staking out the place. Derek's a good guy, works in audit enforcement, has 3 kids, and a wife who legitimately scares me. Bro, he said, handing me a coffee. I need to know if the rumors are true. What rumors? I asked, even though I knew exactly what rumors because I'd watched them spread across social media over the weekend like wildfire in California. Someone at that dinner, my money was on one of the PR team, had apparently posted about the most dramatic dinner of my entire life, without names. But Pittsburgh's professional community is small enough that people connected the dots faster than a kindergarten activity book. That you served your wife divorce papers at her CEO celebration dinner in front of her entire company. Derek was practically vibrating with curiosity, in a red envelope, with evidence of her affair. Please tell me it's true because if it is, you're officially my hero. I took a sip of the coffee, black, no sugar, the way I liked it, and smiled. I neither confirm nor deny the alleged events of last Thursday evening. Oh my God, it's true. Derek sat on the edge of my desk, which was against office protocol, but nobody cared because apparently I was now the office's unofficial entertainment. Dude, that's the most badass thing I've ever heard. My wife showed me the Reddit post about it. Someone wrote it up like a revenge story. 18,000 upvotes. There was a Reddit post. Of course there was a Reddit post. This is what happens when you publicly detonate your marriage in the age of social media. It becomes content. I made a mental note to never, ever read it because I didn't need to know what strangers on the internet thought about my personal life, even if they apparently thought I was some kind of folk hero. But the real story, the stuff that actually mattered, was happening across town at Morrison & Klein Consulting. I didn't know all the details immediately, but information has a way of traveling, especially when you know people who know people. My buddy Jake works in IT at a firm that does contract work for Morrison & Klein, and he texted me Monday afternoon with the subject line, "Dude." Apparently, Clara had come into the office Monday morning trying to project confidence and normalcy, like nothing had happened, like her personal life hadn't just exploded across Pittsburgh's professional scene like a poorly contained chemical spill. She'd walked in wearing what Jake's contact described as power suit armor. Probably that gray Armani number she'd bought for client presentations. Her hair perfect, makeup covering whatever emotional damage had been done over the weekend. But here's the problem with trying to pretend everything's fine when it very clearly isn't. People talk. Her coworkers had heard things, seen things. Some of them had been at the dinner or knew people who were. And by Monday morning, everyone at Morrison & Klein knew that their shiny new CEO had been having an affair with Ethan Price using company resources, had been caught red-handed, and was now facing a very public, very messy divorce. By lunchtime Monday, according to Jake's intel, HR had called both Clara and Ethan into separate meetings. The company had to investigate because I'd been thoughtful enough to document that they'd been using company laptops, company email, and company time to conduct their little romance. And Morrison & Klein, like most corporations trying to avoid lawsuits and bad publicity, had very strict policies about workplace relationships and even stricter policies about using company resources for personal matters. Ethan got suspended immediately. Full stop. Do not pass go. Do not collect your paycheck until we figure out what to do with you. They escorted him out of the building by Tuesday afternoon with a cardboard box of his desk belongings like he was a character in a movie about corporate downsizing. I heard through the grapevine. Okay. Through Jake, who heard it from his contact, who heard it from someone in Ethan's department, that his wife Jennifer had found out about the affair over the weekend. Apparently, someone had been kind enough to send her screenshots of the emails. I have no idea who would do such a thing. None whatsoever. Jennifer filed for divorce on Monday morning, citing infidelity and irreconcilable differences, which made Ethan's week about as fun as a root canal performed by an angry dentist. Clara didn't get suspended, but she got something worse, she got the corporate equivalent of probation. HR launched a full investigation into her conduct, which meant lawyers going through her work emails, her calendar, her expense reports, everything. They were looking for policy violations, and given what I'd already documented, they were going to find plenty. The pharmaceutical contract she'd been working on, the one that had supposedly required all those late nights, turned out most of those strategy sessions were actually dinner dates and hotel visits. The company wasn't thrilled about potentially having to explain to clients why their CEO had been billing personal romantic endeavors as business development. By Wednesday, the story had leaked to one of those corporate gossip newsletters. You know the type. The ones that professionals pretend they don't read but absolutely devour on their lunch breaks. Trouble in Paradise. New CEO's rocky start was the headline. And while they didn't use Clara's name directly, they included enough details that anyone in the Pittsburgh business community knew exactly who they were talking about. Morrison & Klein's stock price didn't tank or anything dramatic, but there were definitely some uncomfortable questions being asked by board members and investors about leadership stability and corporate culture. Clara's big Women in Leadership speaking engagement at the Greater Pittsburgh Chamber of Commerce canceled. The organizers cited scheduling conflicts, which is corporate speak for "we don't want the controversy." Her profile feature in Pittsburgh Magazine about breaking glass ceilings delayed indefinitely, probably forever. The podcast interview she'd scheduled with that business leadership show quietly removed from their upcoming episode list. Meanwhile, back at my office, I was getting treated like I'd won the Super Bowl. My boss, Patricia Henley, no relation to Clara's mother, thank God, called me into her office Wednesday morning, and I genuinely thought I might be in trouble for creating a distraction or bringing personal drama into the workplace. Instead, she closed the door, looked at me seriously, and said, "Adrian, I'm sorry about your situation, but I have to say, the way you handled that took planning and precision. Very analytical, very thorough. Those are qualities we value in this department." Then she approved my promotion to senior financial analyst, a position I'd been gunning for since last year. Was it directly related to my divorce drama? Probably not officially. But did my newfound reputation as someone who could execute a complex plan flawlessly help? I'm not saying it did, but I'm also not saying it didn't. By Thursday, less than a week after the steakhouse incident, Ethan Price had been officially terminated from Morrison & Klein. The company released a vague statement about policy violations and conduct unbecoming of the firm's values, which was corporate speak for "this guy screwed up, and we're covering our asses legally." His LinkedIn profile changed to "seeking new opportunities" within hours, which is the professional equivalent of updating your Facebook status to "it's complicated." Clara survived at Morrison & Klein, technically. She kept her CEO title, kept her office, kept her salary. But her reputation? That was damaged goods. The promotion she'd worked so hard for, the leadership position she'd sacrificed our marriage to achieve, was now permanently tainted by scandal. Every meeting she walked into, every client presentation she gave, every board discussion she participated in would be colored by the knowledge that she'd gotten caught having an affair and using company resources to facilitate it. And me? I was doing just fine. Better than fine, actually. I had my promotion, my dignity, my dog, and the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, the quiet guy keeping the books wins. 3 weeks after the steakhouse incident, I found myself sitting in a conference room at Margaret Chen's law office, staring across a mahogany table at Clara and her attorney, a middle-aged guy named Robert Fletcher, who looked like he'd rather be literally anywhere else. The conference room had that specific smell all law offices seem to have: expensive leather, old books, and the faint scent of broken dreams. Very on-brand for divorce proceedings. Clara looked rough, and I don't mean that in a petty, vindictive way. I mean she genuinely looked like the past 3 weeks had aged her a decade. The designer clothes were still there, but they hung differently on her now, like she'd lost weight from stress. Her hair, usually styled to perfection, was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup, or at least not the full-face situation she usually did. Dark circles under her eyes that concealer couldn't quite hide. She looked like someone who'd been sleeping about as well as I had right after I overheard that bathroom conversation, which is to say not at all. Part of me, that small, stupid part that still remembered being in love with her, felt a twinge of sympathy. But then I remembered the secret bank account, the affair, the plan to divorce me on her timeline after securing her bonus, and that sympathy evaporated faster than water on a Phoenix sidewalk in July. Margaret sat next to me, looking like the legal equivalent of a shark in a designer pantsuit. She had her laptop open, 3 color-coded folders arranged in front of her, and an expression that suggested she was about to enjoy this meeting way more than was probably professional. I'd paid her a substantial retainer, and she was definitely earning every penny. Robert Fletcher cleared his throat and shuffled some papers, doing that thing lawyers do when they're about to deliver bad news, but need to make it sound reasonable. Thank you all for coming today. I think we can handle this matter civilly and come to an agreement that works for both parties. Both parties, Margaret repeated, and I could hear the amusement in her voice. Interesting choice of words, considering one party was planning a unilateral exit strategy using marital funds while conducting an extramarital affair on company time. Fletcher winced. Clara stared at the table like it might offer her an escape route. Let's try to keep this productive, he said weakly. Oh, absolutely. I agreed, leaning back in my chair with the confidence of a man holding all the cards and knowing it. Productivity is important. So let's be productive. What's your opening offer? Fletcher glanced at Clara, who gave a barely perceptible nod. He pulled out a document that looked depressingly official. My client is willing to negotiate a 50-50 split of all marital assets. The house would be sold, proceeds divided equally. Vehicles remain with their current primary drivers. Bank accounts split down the middle. We believe this is fair and equitable given. No, I said simply. Fletcher blinked. I'm sorry, I said no. That's cute that you think we're starting negotiations at 50-50, but that's not happening. I looked at Margaret, who was smiling like a cat who'd just spotted a particularly slow mouse. You want to walk them through why? Or should I? Oh, please, Margaret said, gesturing to me like a game show host revealing a prize. Be my guest. I pulled out my own folder, not as fancy as Margaret's color-coded system, but effective, and slid a document across the table. Let's talk about the house first. That lovely 3-bedroom in Squirrel Hill that we bought 3 years ago for $450,000? I put down 70% of the down payment. That's $63,000 of my money compared to Clara's $27,000. The mortgage has been paid primarily from my account because Clara's contributions mysteriously decreased about 6 months ago when she started funneling money into her secret Citizens Bank savings account. Clara's face went red. Fletcher looked at the document, then looked at her like a disappointed father. Clara, we discussed full financial disclosure. It gets better, I continued, warming to my topic. The car Clara drives, that Lexus RX she loves so much, title's in my name. I bought it outright 2 years ago as an anniversary gift. She's welcome to it, but she'll need to buy me out at fair market value, which according to Kelley Blue Book is approximately $32,000. I slid another paper across the table. Then there's the secret savings account. $8,417, to be exact. Money transferred from our joint checking over a 6-month period in amounts small enough that I guess Clara thought I wouldn't notice. Spoiler alert. I noticed. That's marital property obtained through what's technically financial fraud, which means in a divorce settlement, I'm entitled to claim not just half, but potentially all of it as punitive damages. Fletcher was scribbling notes furiously, probably realizing his client had given him about 10% of the actual story. Clara was crying now, quiet tears that she was trying to hide by staring at her lap. Old Adrian would have stopped, would have felt guilty, would have backed off. New Adrian had been forged in the fires of betrayal and was made of sterner stuff. Should we discuss the stocks? Margaret asked sweetly. I think we should discuss the stocks. Oh, the stocks, I said. Yeah, let's talk about those. Clara received stock options as part of her compensation package at Morrison & Klein. Those options were granted during our marriage, which makes them marital property. Now, normally we'd split them 50-50. But considering Clara used company resources to conduct an affair, which resulted in company investigations and potential policy violations, those stocks might be subject to clawback provisions. But I'm feeling generous, so I'll only take half. Fletcher was looking increasingly uncomfortable, like a man who'd signed up for a simple divorce case and found himself in the middle of a financial forensics investigation. Mr. Brooks, I understand you're upset, but upset. I laughed, and it came out harsher than I intended. Robert, can I call you Robert? I'm not upset. Upset is when your favorite restaurant runs out of the dessert you wanted. I'm something way beyond upset. I'm methodical. There's a difference. Margaret pulled out her own documentation, a thick stack of papers that made Fletcher's folder look like a pamphlet. We're prepared to be reasonable, she said, in a tone that suggested reasonable was a very relative term. My client is willing to accept the house, his vehicle, half of all stock options granted during the marriage, and full custody of the dog. The dog. Clara spoke for the first time, her voice cracking. Adrian, you can't take Max. Watch me, I replied. Max is registered in my name. I'm the one who feeds him, walks him, takes him to the vet. You're at work 80 hours a week. Sorry, you're at work 50 hours a week and with Ethan 30 hours a week. When exactly were you planning to care for a dog? That hit her hard. I could see it in her eyes, the realization that I wasn't just taking assets. I was taking our life apart piece by piece, keeping the parts that mattered and leaving her with the shell. Fletcher tried one more time. My client is willing to negotiate on the dog if we can reach a reasonable agreement on the financial assets. Your client, I interrupted, doesn't get to negotiate from a position of strength. She violated our marriage, violated company policy, and tried to strategically time a divorce to maximize her financial benefit. Margaret has documented everything. Every Uber receipt, every hotel charge, every email with Ethan. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Easy way, she accepts my terms. Hard way, we go to court and I present all of this evidence to a judge who probably won't look kindly on marital fraud and affair-related misconduct. The room went silent except for the sound of the air conditioning humming. Clara was full-on sobbing now, and Fletcher looked like he wanted to bill her double for the stress. What are your final terms? He finally asked, defeated. Margaret smiled. My client keeps the house, his vehicle, his dog, and 50% of all stock options. Mrs. Brooks keeps her vehicle pending buyout payment, her personal effects, her separate accounts, including that secret one, and whatever relationship she has with Mr. Price, though I understand he's currently unemployed. I stood up, buttoning my jacket. You've got 48 hours to accept or reject. After that, we file motions and this gets messy. I looked at Clara one last time. You wanted to plan your exit? Congratulations. This is mine. You know that satisfying feeling you get when you line up dominoes perfectly and then watch them all fall in sequence? That's basically what happened over the next 2 months, except instead of plastic game pieces, it was people's lives and reputations, and instead of feeling guilty about it, I felt like I was watching the universe finally balance its own books. First domino, Ethan Price's marriage. Remember how I mentioned someone might have sent his wife Jennifer those incriminating emails? Well, Jennifer Price wasn't the type to sit around and process her feelings through therapy and meditation. No, Jennifer was a corporate litigator at one of Pittsburgh's biggest law firms, which meant she had the legal knowledge, the financial resources, and the professional vindictiveness to absolutely destroy Ethan's life with surgical precision. She filed for divorce exactly 1 week after the steakhouse incident, and her filing wasn't some gentle, irreconcilable differences situation. Jennifer went nuclear. The court documents, which somehow made their way to various legal gossip channels, definitely not through me, cited adultery, financial misconduct, and emotional abandonment. She demanded full custody of their 2 kids, the house in Fox Chapel, his retirement accounts, and spousal support. The cherry on top? She included printouts of his emails with Clara as exhibits, which meant they became part of public record. Ethan tried to fight it initially, hired some mediocre attorney who probably gave him hope that he could negotiate something reasonable. But you can't negotiate with a corporate litigator who's personally motivated and professionally equipped to ruin you. By the end of month 1, Ethan had moved into a studio apartment in Bloomfield, was seeing his kids every other weekend under supervised visitation because Jennifer convinced the judge he was emotionally unstable, and was working at a mid-tier consulting firm making about 60% of his Morrison & Klein salary. His LinkedIn went from senior strategy consultant at Morrison & Klein to independent business consultant, which is professional code for unemployed but trying to sound important. I didn't feel bad for him, not even a little bit. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, as the kids say. Second domino, Clara's social circle. Remember Tanya and Bree, the bathroom gossips who'd inadvertently given me the heads up about my impending divorce? Yeah, they ghosted Clara faster than a Tinder date, who just saw a red flag parade. I heard through the grapevine, and by grapevine, I mean my new friend Marcus who works at the gym where Tanya's husband Chad goes, that both women had completely cut ties with Clara after the scandal broke. Turns out, being associated with workplace affair drama isn't great for your own professional reputation, and both Tanya and Bree had their own careers to protect. Tanya worked in finance where reputation is everything, and Bree's startup was trying to attract investors who probably wouldn't love being connected to scandal-adjacent people. So they did what self-serving people do best. They saved themselves and threw Clara overboard like cargo during a storm. Clara tried texting them, from what I gathered through mutual acquaintances. Tried calling. Even showed up at Tanya's house one weekend, which resulted in a very awkward doorstep conversation that the neighbors definitely heard and absolutely discussed at their next book club meeting. But Tanya and Bree had made their choice, and that choice was self-preservation over friendship. The rest of Clara's friend group followed suit. Her yoga class buddies stopped saving her a spot. Her book club mysteriously started meeting on nights she couldn't attend. The women she'd networked with at those professional development conferences suddenly had very full calendars when she tried to grab coffee. In the span of about 6 weeks, Clara went from having a robust social network to being essentially persona non grata in Pittsburgh's professional women's circles. Third domino, Clara's reputation. And this is where things got really interesting, because watching someone's professional reputation collapse in the age of social media is like watching a building demolition in slow motion. Fascinating, a little horrifying, and absolutely impossible to stop once it starts. The Reddit post Derek had mentioned? It blew up. Someone had written up the entire steakhouse incident like a revenge fantasy story, and it hit every popular subreddit. Relationship advice, petty revenge, pro-revenge, nuclear revenge. People were sharing it on Twitter, LinkedIn, professionally reframed, of course, and Facebook. Someone even made a TikTok series analyzing the strategic brilliance of my approach, which felt surreal to watch while eating leftover pizza on my couch. The red envelope divorce became a whole thing. People started using it as a reference point. I'd overhear conversations at coffee shops. If my partner ever cheats, I'm going full red envelope on them. My story became shorthand for calculated, public revenge, which was flattering and weird in equal measure. At work, I became a legend. Not just at my office, but throughout the federal building. People I'd never met would nod respectfully when I walked by. The cafeteria lady started giving me extra cookies with my lunch. Even the security guards knew who I was. "Hey, red envelope guy," one of them said while checking my badge one morning. Respect, man. Absolute respect. Someone created a meme using a stock photo that vaguely looked like me, holding a red envelope with increasingly creative captions. My personal favorite: when she thinks you don't know about finances, but you literally audit people for a living. It got shared about 50,000 times across various platforms. My niece sent it to me asking if it was actually me. I neither confirmed nor denied. The professional community in Pittsburgh treated me like I'd pulled off a heist. At networking events, which I started attending more frequently post-divorce because why not? People would introduce themselves and then inevitably ask, "Wait, are you the guy?" And I'd smile and change the subject, but the damage was done. I was that guy, the legend, the man who'd served divorce papers at a celebration dinner and walked away like an action hero. Meanwhile, Clara's reputation went in the exact opposite direction. Morrison and Klein kept her on as CEO, but everyone knew she was damaged goods. Clients started requesting other consultants. Her Women in Leadership brand was essentially dead. Articles that had been planned about her success were quietly shelved. She'd become a cautionary tale instead of an inspiration. And me? I was thriving. Promotion at work. New apartment with a killer view. Gym membership that I actually used. A dating life that was surprisingly active once word got around that I was single. Life was good. The dominoes had fallen exactly as they should. 3 months after the steakhouse incident, I was living a life I barely recognized, and honestly, I wasn't mad about it. If someone had told me back in January that by October I'd be the guy with a downtown apartment, a dating life, and abs that were starting to exist as actual distinct entities rather than theoretical concepts, I would have laughed and gone back to my comfortable routine of microwave dinners and Netflix binges. But here I was, living proof that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just becoming the best version of yourself while your ex watches from the sidelines. The apartment was probably my favorite upgrade. I'd moved out of the Squirrel Hill house, which was technically mine per the settlement, but held too many memories of a marriage I was actively trying to forget, and into a two-bedroom loft in downtown Pittsburgh. 16th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the city skyline that made me feel like I was living in a movie about successful people instead of actually being one. The place cost more than I'd normally spend on rent, but I figured I'd earned it. Consider it a divorce present to myself, funded partially by the extremely generous settlement Margaret had negotiated on my behalf. Max loved it too, though he was confused about why we suddenly had hardwood floors instead of carpet and why his backyard had been replaced by a balcony where he could watch pigeons but not chase them. He adapted though, because dogs are resilient like that. Unlike humans, who need therapy and self-help books and 3 months of emotional processing to handle major life changes, Max just needed his favorite tennis ball and regular meal times. I envied his simplicity. The gym membership was new too. I joined this place in the Strip district called Iron and Grit, which sounds like a CrossFit cult, but was actually just a solid gym with good equipment and people who minded their own business. I started going 4 times a week, partly because I needed to do something productive with all the nervous energy that comes with dismantling your entire life, and partly because spite is an incredible motivator. There's nothing quite like the mental image of running into your ex-wife while looking noticeably better than you did when you were married to really push you through that last set of bench presses. I hired a trainer too. This guy named Marcus, who I mentioned earlier, the one who gave me intel about Tanya's husband. Marcus was one of those naturally enthusiastic people who could make burpees sound exciting, which should be illegal, but somehow worked. He had me on a program that was actually showing results. My clothes fit better. My face looked less like exhausted government employee and more like guy who has his life together. People noticed. I noticed them noticing, which fed into a positive feedback loop that kept me motivated. The cooking thing started as a necessity and became something I actually enjoyed. Turns out when you're not trying to coordinate dinner with someone else's schedule, you can actually experiment and make mistakes and eat cereal for dinner without judgment. I bought one of those fancy cast iron skillets, watched way too many YouTube cooking channels, and learned to make things that didn't come from a box or a delivery app. Nothing fancy. I wasn't becoming a chef or anything, but I could make a decent stir-fry, grill a steak without setting off the smoke alarm. And my pasta carbonara was legitimately good enough that I'd started making it for dates. Which brought me to the dating situation. I'd downloaded the apps, Hinge, Bumble, the usual suspects, with extremely low expectations and a profile that my friend Derek helped me write after rejecting my initial attempt, which apparently made me sound like a tax form with abandonment issues. But once I updated my photos to include ones from my new apartment and post-gym glow-up, the response was surprisingly positive. Turns out, recently divorced government analyst with a revenge story that went viral is apparently an intriguing dating profile element. Who knew? I went on a bunch of first dates that went nowhere. Coffee with Amanda, who talked about her cats for 45 minutes straight. Dinner with Rachel, who spent the entire meal on her phone. Drinks with Kelly, who asked if I could help her commit tax fraud, which was both insulting to my professional integrity and wildly illegal. But then I met Jade at a networking event. She worked in marketing for a tech startup downtown, and something clicked. Jade thought my story was hilarious, which was refreshing after dates with women who either found it intimidating or saw me as damaged goods. That's the funniest plot twist I've heard since Michael Scott left The Office. She'd said over our first dinner together at Butcher and the Rye. She had this laugh that made everyone around us smile, and she didn't take herself too seriously, which after years with Clara felt like drinking water after being lost in a desert. We'd been seeing each other for about a month now. Nothing too serious yet. Just enjoying each other's company without the pressure of defining what we were or where it was going. She'd met Max, who approved immediately because Jade had the good sense to bring dog treats to our third date. She hadn't met my friends yet because I was taking things slow, learning from past mistakes, not rushing into anything just because it felt good. For the first time in years, I wasn't the supporting character in someone else's story. I was the main character in my own life, and honestly, The narrative was pretty damn good. People ask me sometimes if I miss her. Usually it's at parties or networking events, after a few drinks when the conversation gets personal and someone inevitably brings up the red envelope incident, like it's a historical event that needs commemorating. They ask with this mixture of curiosity and concern, like they're trying to figure out if I'm secretly broken inside despite the new apartment and the gym membership and the general air of having my life together. My answer is always the same. Sure, I miss her like I miss dial-up internet. Which is to say, not at all. And also, what kind of psychopath would voluntarily go back to dial-up when fiber optic exists? You don't downgrade your life once you've experienced the upgrade. And trust me, post-Clara life is definitely an upgrade. Faster connection speeds, fewer dropped calls, and significantly less buffering while trying to figure out what's actually happening in my own marriage. The thing is, I learned something beautiful through this whole disaster. Revenge doesn't need to look like a movie. It doesn't require elaborate schemes with fire and explosions and dramatic confrontations in the ring. Sometimes the best revenge is just math, patience, and confidence. Numbers on a spreadsheet. Paper trails that don't lie. The willingness to wait for exactly the right moment to reveal that you've been paying attention all along. Clara thought I was 3 moves behind when I was actually 6 moves ahead. She thought I'd stay quiet forever, that I was the kind of guy who'd just accept whatever happened to him with a resigned shrug and a well, I guess that's life. She made the critical mistake of underestimating the quiet guy who tracks spending for a living, who notices patterns, who literally gets paid to find money people are trying to hide. You can't outsmart someone whose entire job is catching people who think they're being clever. It's like trying to outswim a fish. Technically possible, but statistically unlikely and definitely not recommended. I still remember that moment at Lamont's when she opened that red envelope. The way her face transformed from $1,000,000 smile to $1,000,000 lawsuit in about 3 seconds. The way reality crashed through her carefully constructed fantasy like a freight train through tissue paper. That moment, that precise instant when she realized I knew everything and had been planning my own exit while she thought she was the mastermind, that moment made every late night compiling evidence worth it. 6 months later, I'm sitting on my balcony with Max at my feet, watching the Pittsburgh skyline light up as the sun sets, and I realize something profound. Closure doesn't always come from conversations or apologies or mutual understanding. Sometimes closure comes gift-wrapped in a red envelope, served at a steakhouse dinner, with a side of public humiliation and a legally binding divorce settlement. Clara got her CEO position. She got Ethan, at least until he became too much baggage to carry. She got exactly what she wanted, just without the safety net she'd planned on having. And me? I got my life back. Got my dignity. Got a dog who loves me unconditionally and a girlfriend who thinks my strategic approach to divorce is hilarious rather than terrifying. Got a promotion, an apartment with a view, and the kind of peace that comes from knowing you handled a nightmare situation with precision and grace. The ledger is balanced. The books are closed. And honestly, that's the best ending I could have asked for. Sometimes the quiet guy wins. And when he does, he doesn't gloat. He just moves forward, lives well, and lets the dominoes fall where they may. Game over. I won.